An 8-year-old boy discovers a crying newborn abandoned in the dumpster and carries it to the ER. When doctors examine the baby, the marks they find on its body leave everyone horrified. The first snowfall of December had transformed Portland into a postcard scene. Rooftops dusted white, holiday lights reflecting off fresh powder. But at 8 years old, Theo Foster knew winter in Maine had a second face. One that bit through worn gloves and found every gap in your coat. This evening was showing that harsher side as he trudged behind Good Value Market, his recycling bag swinging at his side. "Grandpa says waste not, want not," Theo muttered to himself, repeating his grandfather's favorite saying as he scanned the ground for discarded aluminum cans. The school's recycling drive had been Theo's project from the start. Mrs. Winslow had announced it as a class competition, but while other kids quickly lost interest, Theo had persisted. Not because he particularly cared about winning, though the promised pizza party held some appeal, but because it gave his days structure, a mission beyond the endless waiting for his father's next video call from somewhere in the Middle East. Harold Foster had been waiting for retirement, for the golden years with his wife that never came, and then, after his daughter-in-law's sudden death, waiting for his son to return from military deployment. Now, at 72, he found himself guardian to a solemn 8-year-old with eyes too knowing for his age. Theo's father was a military doctor, currently stationed at a field hospital somewhere classified. As he'd say with a forced smile during their monthly video chats, the arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but temporary had stretched to 2 years now. Tonight, Harold had taken his evening heart medication, which reliably put him to sleep for at least 2 hours. He'd been reluctant to let Theo go out alone, but the boy had insisted. "It's just down the block, Grandpa, and I'll be back before your show even ends. Besides, Mrs. Peterson is right next door if anything happens." Harold had relented, partly because Theo rarely asked for anything, and partly because the boy had already shouldered too much responsibility for someone so young. It seemed cruel to deny him this small independence. Theo had promised to stay on their block, but the slim pickings had lured him farther. The back of Good Value Market, 2 blocks from home, was usually a goldmine of recyclables. The evening stock boy, Jason, often set aside cans for him, impressed by the little boy's dedication. But Jason wasn't working tonight, and the area behind the store was deserted and darker than Theo had anticipated. The security light above the back door had burned out, leaving only the distant street lamp to cast long shadows across the loading area. The dumpster loomed against the wall, its green bulk almost black in the dim light. A bitter wind cut through Theo's jacket, reminding him that he'd been out longer than promised. He was about to turn back when he heard it, a sound so faint he might have imagined it. He paused, head tilted. There it was again, a mewling cry, like a kitten, coming from the direction of the dumpster. Theo approached cautiously. "Kitty," he called softly, "are you stuck?" The crying continued, a plaintive sound that tugged at something in Theo's chest. He'd always been sensitive to animals in distress, once spending 3 hours coaxing a neighbor's frightened cat down from a tree. His grandfather called it the Foster compassion gene, something his father had in abundance too. The dumpster was too tall for Theo to see inside, so he dragged over a milk crate from the stack by the back door. Standing on it, he peered over the edge, expecting to see a shivering kitten. What he saw instead made him nearly lose his balance. Half buried beneath discarded produce and cardboard was a small bundle wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket or towel. The sound was coming from within it, and as Theo watched, the bundle moved slightly. "Hello," Theo whispered, his breath clouding in the cold air. The bundle shifted again, and a tiny, bluish hand emerged from one end. Theo's heart hammered against his ribs. This was no kitten. Time seemed to slow as Theo processed what he was seeing. A baby. Someone had thrown away a baby. The thought was so impossible, so monstrous, that his mind rebelled against it. But the weak cry came again, and instinct took over. Carefully, he reached into the dumpster. The bundle was lighter than he'd expected, and shockingly cold to the touch. As he lifted it out, a corner of the blanket fell away, revealing a tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, lips blue with cold. Theo cradled the infant against his chest, his mind racing. He needed to get help. His grandfather was asleep, possibly for hours still. Mrs. Peterson next door was nearly deaf. The nearest house with lights on was several minutes away. But Portland Medical Center was only 5 blocks down, where Randall Avenue met Main Street. He'd passed it countless times on the bus to school. "I'm going to get you help," he whispered to the baby, who had gone frighteningly quiet now. "Please don't die. Please." The word die hung in the air, making the situation suddenly, terrifyingly real. Theo tucked the blanket more securely around the infant and began walking as quickly as he dared, afraid of jostling his fragile cargo. The streets were nearly empty in the cold evening. A few cars passed, their headlights briefly illuminating Theo before moving on, drivers oblivious to the small drama unfolding on the sidewalk. Theo kept talking to the baby, reciting facts from his science book, telling fragments of stories his father had sent him. Anything to fill the silence and ward off his growing fear that he might be carrying a tiny corpse. "My dad says body heat helps when someone's too cold," Theo continued, unzipping his coat slightly to hold the baby closer to his warmth. "He's a doctor, so he knows about these things. He's not here right now, but he's helping soldiers far away. I bet he's helped babies too." The baby stirred slightly, making a sound so faint Theo might have missed it if he hadn't been listening so intently. Relief flooded through him. "That's it," he encouraged. "Keep fighting." The hospital's emergency entrance blazed with light ahead, a beacon in the darkening evening. As Theo approached, the automatic doors slid open, welcoming him into the bright, antiseptic interior. The sudden warmth against his frozen face made him realize how cold he'd been. The emergency room was busy but not chaotic. A security guard stood near the entrance, a nurse sat at the admitting desk, and a few people waited in molded plastic chairs. Theo stood just inside the doors, suddenly uncertain. Everyone looked so busy, so adult. Would they even listen to him? "Can I help you, young man?" The admitting nurse had noticed him standing there, clutching his bundle. Theo stepped forward. "I found a baby," he said, his voice sounding smaller than he'd intended. "In the dumpster behind Good Value. I think it's really sick." The nurse's expression changed from polite inquiry to alarm. "What did you say?" "A baby," Theo repeated, more urgently now. "In the dumpster. It's really cold." He partially unwrapped the blanket to show the infant's face. The nurse was immediately on her feet, calling out, "Dr. Rivera, need you here now." She rushed around the desk as a woman in a white coat hurried over from where she'd been speaking with another patient. Dr. Nora Rivera had been heading home when the call came for just one more consult. 12 hours into what should have been an 8-hour shift, she'd been counting the minutes until she could leave. But the moment she saw what Theo was holding, all thoughts of home vanished. "Oh my God," she breathed, gently taking the bundle from Theo's arms. The baby was alarmingly cold, with bluish extremities and barely perceptible breathing. "Get a warming unit in Trauma 2, now. Call NICU and tell them we need a team down here stat." The emergency room erupted into focused activity. The baby was whisked away, surrounded by medical personnel speaking in rapid, technical bursts. Theo stood forgotten for a moment, his arms suddenly empty, the warmth of the hospital making him realize he was shivering violently. "Hey there." A tall security guard with kind eyes crouched down to Theo's level. "That was a really brave thing you did. How about we find someplace for you to sit down, and maybe get you some hot chocolate? Then we need to call your parents. Okay?" Theo nodded numbly, his eyes still fixed on the doorway where the baby had disappeared. "Is it going to die?" he asked bluntly. The guard hesitated. "The doctors here are very good at their jobs," he said carefully. "Now, what's your name?" "Theo. Theo Foster. I'm Officer Reyes. Come with me, Theo. We'll get you warmed up, and you can tell me exactly what happened." Officer Reyes led him to a small room off the main waiting area, a place normally reserved for families receiving difficult news. It had comfortable chairs, a box of tissues, and a small table where a hospital volunteer soon placed a steaming cup of hot chocolate. As Theo wrapped his hands around the warm mug, The events of the evening caught up with him. His hands began to tremble, sloshing hot liquid over the rim. "Easy now," Officer Reyes said, steadying the mug. "You're safe. Everything's okay." But Theo knew better. The image of the tiny blue hand emerging from the blanket was seared into his memory. Nothing felt okay at all. "My grandpa," Theo said suddenly. "He's home alone. He takes medicine that makes him sleep. He doesn't know where I am." "We'll call him right away," Officer Reyes assured him. "What's his number?" Theo recited his home phone number, a skill his father had drilled into him from an early age. As Officer Reyes stepped out to make the call, a woman in plain clothes entered, her badge clipped to her belt. "Hello, Theo. I'm Detective Powell," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "I understand you found a baby tonight. I need you to tell me everything that happened, from the beginning." Theo took a deep breath and started talking, his account precise and methodical in a way that surprised the detective. Many adults, shocked by traumatic events, gave scattered, emotional testimonies. This small boy, however, related his discovery with remarkable clarity, from his reason for being behind the store to his decision-making process about where to take the infant. "And you didn't see anyone else near the dumpster?" Detective Powell asked when he finished. Theo shook his head. "No, ma'am. It was really quiet back there." "What made you look in the dumpster in the first place?" "I heard crying. I thought it was a kitten." Detective Powell made a note. "And you carried the baby all the way here by yourself? You didn't think to ask an adult for help?" Theo's expression clouded. "My grandpa was asleep. There wasn't anybody else around, and I thought the baby might die if I waited too long." Something in the detective's face softened. "You made a good decision, Theo. A very good decision." Officer Reyes returned, looking concerned. "No answer at the home number," he reported. "I let it ring quite a while." Fear spiked through Theo. "Grandpa takes his pill at 7. It makes him sleep really hard. Sometimes he doesn't hear the phone." "Is there a neighbor we could call?" Detective Powell asked. "Mrs. Peterson next door, but she's really old and doesn't hear well either," Theo said. "Maybe we could call Ms. Wilson? She lives across the street and sometimes watches me after school." As they sorted out how to reach an adult who could check on Harold, Dr. Rivera appeared in the doorway. Her expression was controlled, professional, but Theo immediately sensed the tension behind it. "How is the baby?" he asked before anyone else could speak. Dr. Rivera came in and sat down across from him. "She's alive thanks to you," she said. "She's very small, probably born within the last 24 hours, and she was suffering from hypothermia and dehydration. But we've got her warming up and on fluids now." "She?" Theo repeated. "It's a girl." "Yes, a baby girl," Dr. Rivera confirmed. "She's being transferred to our neonatal intensive care unit, where they can monitor her closely." Detective Powell leaned forward slightly. "Doctor, was there anything else? Any injuries or marks that might be relevant to my investigation?" Dr. Rivera hesitated, glancing at Theo. "Perhaps we should discuss that separately." "No," Theo said firmly. "Please tell me. I found her. I need to know." The adults exchanged looks, a silent negotiation that Theo recognized all too well from when his mother was sick and no one wanted to tell him the truth. Finally, Dr. Rivera sighed. "When we examined the baby, we found what appeared to be cigarette burns on her legs and bruising around her neck. Doesn't look accidental." Theo's hot chocolate suddenly tasted like ash in his mouth. Someone hurt her on purpose? Before putting her in the trash? The bluntness of the question hung in the air. Dr. Rivera nodded gravely. "I'm afraid that's what it looks like, yes." Theo sat very still, processing this information. His young mind struggled to comprehend the kind of person who could do such a thing to a helpless infant. He thought of his own mother, how even in her final days, weak from cancer, she'd stroked his hair and told him he was the best thing she'd ever done. How could anyone treat their baby so differently? "Theo," Detective Powell said gently, "I know this is scary and confusing, but you did something extraordinary tonight. You saved that little girl's life." Before Theo could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Harold Foster appeared in the doorway, still in his slippers and looking disoriented, with Officer Reyes and a woman Theo recognized as Ms. Wilson from across the street flanking him. "Theo!" Harold exclaimed, relief evident in his weathered face. "What in God's name is going on? Ms. Wilson comes pounding on my door saying something about you and the hospital." "Grandpa!" Theo ran to his grandfather, who enfolded him in a tight embrace. "I'm sorry I went farther than I promised. But I found a baby in the dumpster, and I had to bring her here." Harold looked up at the adults in the room, confusion clear in his eyes. "A baby? What is he talking about?" As Detective Powell explained the situation, Harold's face went through a rapid succession of emotions. Shock, horror, and finally a profound pride as he realized what his grandson had done. That's incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But Theo, you could have come home first, had me call 911. "There wasn't time," Theo insisted. "She was so cold, Grandpa. And so little." Harold hugged him tighter. "You're your father's son, all right? Heart bigger than your head sometimes." Despite his words, there was no mistaking the pride in his voice. Detective Powell approached, her manner gentle but official. "Mr. Foster, I'd like to ask Theo a few more questions if that's all right. And we'll need a formal statement from both of you." Harold straightened up, his arms still around Theo's shoulders. "Of course, whatever you need." As the adults continued talking, setting up times for further interviews and explaining the legal process that would follow, Theo's thoughts returned to the baby, to her tiny blue fingers and the marks on her body. He wondered what would happen to her now, and whether she had a name. He wondered if she knew someone had tried to save her. "Can I see her again?" he asked suddenly, interrupting the adult conversation. "The baby, I mean, just to know she's okay." Dr. Rivera hesitated. "She's in NICU now, which has very strict visiting rules." "Please," Theo persisted. "I just want to see that she's better than when I found her." Something in his earnest request seemed to move the doctor. "Tell you what," she said. "Tomorrow, if her condition is stable, maybe we can arrange a brief visit. Would that be acceptable, Mr. Foster?" Harold nodded. "I think that would be important for Theo, yes." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Detective Powell handed Harold her card. "Please call me if Theo remembers anything else, no matter how small it might seem." In the hospital parking lot, Ms. Wilson offered them a ride home in her car. Theo sat in the back seat, gazing out at the now dark streets they traveled. The same route he'd walked with his precious cargo felt different now, both familiar and somehow altered, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. At home, Harold insisted on making Theo hot soup despite the late hour, watching worriedly as the boy ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere. "You know," Harold said as he sat across from his grandson, "what you did tonight. It was remarkable, Theo. Not many grown men would have done what you did." Theo stirred his soup. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Harold said firmly. "Not anyone. Not even close to anyone." He reached across and squeezed Theo's hand. "Your father is going to be so proud when I tell him." The mention of his father brought a small smile to Theo's face. "Do you think he'll get to come home soon?" "I don't know, buddy, but I'm going to email him tonight about what happened. This might be important enough for them to grant him some leave." As Theo finally climbed into bed, exhausted from the evening's events, he found himself thinking of the baby girl in the hospital. Did she have a special blanket like his own worn blue one? Was someone sitting with her so she wouldn't be scared? "Grandpa?" he called as Harold was about to close his bedroom door. "Yes, Theo?" "The baby. Did they say what her name is?" Harold shook his head. "I don't think she has one yet, buddy." Theo frowned. "Everyone should have a name. The hospital will give her one, I'm sure. Or her new family will, when the time comes." As the door closed and darkness settled over his room, Theo burrowed under his covers. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, adding fresh powder to the day's accumulation. Somewhere across town, in a brightly lit hospital room, A tiny girl was fighting for life because he'd heard her cry. "Good night, little no-name," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm glad I found you." The harsh fluorescent lights of Portland Medical Center's pediatric wing cast everything in a clinical blue-white glow. Theo sat rigidly on a vinyl chair outside the neonatal intensive care unit, his sneakers barely touching the floor. Beside him, his grandfather Harold dozed fitfully, his breathing occasionally catching in a light snore before resuming its normal rhythm. It was just past 10 in the morning, nearly 14 hours since Theo had carried a half-frozen newborn through the emergency room doors. Despite Harold's gentle suggestion that they could visit another day, Theo had been adamant. "I need to see that she's okay," he'd insisted over breakfast, pushing his cereal around the bowl. "What if she thinks everyone abandoned her again?" Harold hadn't the heart to argue. The boy had slept poorly, waking twice from nightmares he refused to discuss. Perhaps seeing the baby recovering would help put his mind at ease. Dr. Rivera had called early that morning, true to her word. The baby girl was stable but still in serious condition. If they wanted to visit, she could arrange a brief viewing through the NICU window. Now they waited while Dr. Rivera finished her rounds. Theo's legs swung nervously under the chair. "What's taking so long?" he whispered, not wanting to wake his grandfather. "Hospital time moves differently," came the unexpected reply from Harold, who opened one eye. "Your grandmother used to say that, when your dad was little, he fell out of a tree and broke his arm. 3 hours in the ER felt like 3 days. Theo absorbed this information silently. His father rarely spoke of his childhood, and Harold mentioned Theo's grandmother even less frequently. The past seemed to be a place adults visited reluctantly, like a grave site, necessary but painful. The elevator doors at the end of the hall opened, and Detective Powell stepped out. She spotted them immediately and walked over, her sensible shoes making little sound on the polished floor. "Mr. Foster, Theo," she greeted them, her voice professional but kind. "Dr. Rivera mentioned you'd be here this morning." Harold straightened in his chair. "Has there been any progress in finding who did this?" Detective Powell glanced at Theo, clearly measuring how much to say in front of the boy. "We're following several leads. The security cameras behind Good Value weren't operational. Unfortunately, budget cuts meant they disconnected them last month. But we're canvassing the area businesses and residents." "What about the baby's mother?" Theo asked bluntly. "Did you find her yet?" The detective's expression softened slightly. "Not yet, Theo, but we will." "When you do, will she go to jail?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its directness. Detective Powell chose her words carefully. "That depends on many factors. Sometimes people do terrible things because they're in terrible situations themselves. Part of my job is understanding why this happened." Theo frowned, clearly finding this answer unsatisfying. Before he could press further, Dr. Rivera appeared in the hallway, still writing notes on a tablet as she walked. "Ah, you're all here," she said, looking up. "Good morning." Her scrubs were a cheerful pattern of cartoon frogs, at odds with her tired eyes. "The baby had a stable night. Her body temperature is normal now, and she's accepting nutrition through a feeding tube." "Is she crying?" Theo asked. Dr. Rivera smiled. "Yes, which is actually a good sign. She has healthy lungs and a strong will to make her needs known." "Can we see her?" Harold asked, placing a steady hand on Theo's shoulder. "For a few minutes," Dr. Rivera agreed. "You'll need to look through the window. The NICU is a sterile environment, and we're being especially cautious given her compromised start." She led them through double doors and down a short corridor to a large window. Beyond it lay the NICU, a room filled with incubators, monitoring equipment, and staff in pale blue scrubs moving efficiently between stations. "There," Dr. Rivera pointed to an incubator near the window. "That's our little Jane Doe." Theo pressed his hands against the glass, leaning forward to see better. The baby looked impossibly small, dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding her. Unlike the blue-tinged infant he'd found, her skin now had a healthier pink hue. Wires and tubes connected her to various monitors and I.V bags. A nurse in a mask and gloves was carefully adjusting something near the incubator. "She's so little," Theo whispered. 4 pounds, 3 ounces, Dr. Rivera confirmed. "Small, but actually not dangerously so. She appears to have been born at approximately 36 weeks gestation, what we call late preterm. It's one of the reasons she survived the exposure as well as she did." Harold cleared his throat. "And the injuries? How are those?" Dr. Rivera's expression grew more somber. "The burns are superficial, 1st degree, like a bad sunburn. They'll heal without scarring. The bruising around her neck is more concerning, but there's no damage to her trachea." "Was someone trying to strangle her?" Theo asked, his voice steady despite the horror of the question. The adults exchanged glances, that familiar silent communication that Theo had come to recognize as grown-ups deciding how honest to be. "It's possible," Dr. Rivera finally admitted. "But Detective Powell and her team will determine exactly what happened." "Does she have a name yet?" Theo asked, changing the subject abruptly. "You called her Jane Doe, but that's not a real name." Dr. Rivera smiled slightly. "It's a placeholder we use when we don't know someone's identity. The hospital social worker will assign her a temporary name until her situation is resolved." "She looks like a phoenix," Theo said decisively. "A phoenix," Harold repeated. "From my mythology book. The bird that rises from the ashes." Theo kept his eyes on the tiny infant. "She almost died, but she didn't. She fought back." Dr. Rivera's expression softened. "Phoenix. That's actually quite beautiful." "I'll make a note of it," Detective Powell said, "when we speak with the social worker." Inside the NICU, the nurse who had been attending to the baby looked up and noticed them at the window. She said something to the infant, then gave a small wave in their direction. "That's Nurse Abernathy," Dr. Rivera explained. "She's one of our most experienced NICU nurses. Your little phoenix is in excellent hands." "When will she be well enough to leave the hospital?" Harold asked. "That depends on several factors. We need to make sure she's gaining weight, maintaining her body temperature on her own, and feeding successfully. Then there's the matter of where she'll go." Dr. Rivera glanced at Detective Powell. "That's where social services comes in." "Foster care," Detective Powell clarified. "Once she's medically cleared, she'll be placed with a licensed foster family until a more permanent solution is found." "Like adoption?" Theo asked, still watching the baby through the glass. "Possibly. Or reunification with family, if appropriate family members can be identified." "Not her mother," Theo said firmly. "Not the person who hurt her." Detective Powell's expression remained neutral. "These situations are often complicated, Theo. But I promise you, our primary concern is this baby's safety and well-being." Theo seemed unconvinced but didn't argue further. His attention was drawn back to the NICU as Nurse Abernathy opened one of the portholes in the incubator and gently stroked the baby's arm with a gloved finger. The infant's tiny hand curled reflexively around the nurse's fingertip. "She's strong," Dr. Rivera observed. "Resilient. That gives her excellent odds." They watched in silence for another minute before Dr. Rivera gently suggested they wrap up the visit. "She needs her rest, and I have rounds to finish." As they turned to leave, Detective Powell's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, her expression changing subtly. "Excuse me," she said. "I need to take this." She stepped away, speaking in low tones that didn't carry to where Theo and Harold stood. When she returned, there was a new tension in her posture. "Dr. Rivera, could I have a word?" she asked. The two women moved several paces down the hall, their conversation inaudible but clearly serious. "Something's happened," Theo whispered to his grandfather. Harold squeezed his shoulder. "Let the professionals do their work, Theo." When Detective Powell returned, her face was composed but her eyes were alert, focused. "Mr. Foster, would it be possible for me to speak with you and Theo at the station later today? Say, around 2 o'clock? We have some new information I'd like to discuss." Harold looked concerned. "Is this necessary? Theo's been through quite an ordeal." "I understand, sir." But Theo's perspective could be valuable. I promise we'll keep it brief. I want to help, Theo interjected before his grandfather could respond. If it helps Phoenix. Harold sighed. 2 o'clock it is, then. As they walked back toward the elevator, Theo took one last glance through the NICU window. Nurse Abernathy was still there, writing something on a chart while keeping a watchful eye on the incubator that held Phoenix. For a moment, Theo felt a strange connection to this woman he'd never met. They were both guardians of a sort, looking out for someone who couldn't protect herself. The Portland Police Department's main station was a sprawling brick building downtown, its exterior weathered by decades of Maine winters. Inside, however, it was surprisingly modern, open workspaces, computers on every desk, and a general atmosphere of efficient professionalism. Detective Powell met them in the lobby, escorting them past the front desk to a room she called the family room, a space designed to be less intimidating than a formal interview room, with comfortable furniture and soft lighting. "Can I get either of you something to drink?" she offered. "Water? Coffee? Hot chocolate for Theo, perhaps?" "No, thank you," Harold answered for both of them. "Detective, what is this about? You mentioned new information." Detective Powell nodded, taking a seat across from them. "Yes, we've been reviewing security footage from businesses in the area surrounding Good Value Market. A camera at the gas station 2 blocks away captured footage of a young woman walking in that direction around 5:30 p.m. yesterday, shortly before Theo found the baby. She placed a tablet on the coffee table between them, cued to a still image from a security video. The picture was grainy but showed a teenage girl walking with her head down, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore a hooded jacket, but her face was partially visible, young, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. "Do either of you recognize this person?" Detective Powell asked. Harold shook his head immediately, but Theo leaned forward, studying the image with intense concentration. "Maybe," he said after a long moment. I think I've seen her at Good Value before. She bags groceries sometimes." Detective Powell's expression sharpened with interest. "Are you certain?" "Not totally," Theo admitted. "Her hair is different in this picture. But there's a girl who works there part-time. She's pretty quiet. I don't know her name." "Would Jason know?" Harold asked. "That stock boy who saves cans for you?" Theo nodded. "Probably. He knows everyone who works there." Detective Powell made a note on her pad. "Jason's last name, if you have it?" "Martinez, I think," Theo replied. "He goes to Portland High." "That's very helpful, Theo," Detective Powell said. "We've been trying to identify this young woman. If she works at Good Value, that gives us a solid lead." "Is she the mother?" Harold asked directly. Detective Powell's expression gave nothing away. "We don't know that yet, but she's a person of interest in our investigation." She showed them several more images from the security footage, asking if Theo recognized any other details. The backpack, the jacket, even the girl's walking pattern. Theo answered as best he could, though many of the questions seemed strange to him. Why would it matter which side she carried her backpack on? After about 20 minutes, Detective Powell set the tablet aside. "There's one more thing I'd like to discuss," she said, her tone shifting slightly. The medical examination of the baby revealed something concerning. There were traces of a sedative in her system, not at dangerous levels, but present. Harold frowned. "Someone drugged a newborn? Why?" "To keep her quiet, most likely," Detective Powell replied grimly. "To prevent her from crying and being discovered." Theo's hands curled into fists on his lap. "So they didn't want anyone to find her. They wanted her to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "We don't know for certain what the intent was," Detective Powell said carefully. "But yes, it suggests the abandonment was deliberate and planned." The weight of this information settled heavily in the room. Theo stared at his sneakers, trying to process the idea that someone had not only hurt Phoenix and left her in the trash, but had also drugged her to ensure she wouldn't be found. "But I did find her," he said finally, looking up with unexpected fierceness. "Their plan didn't work." A ghost of a smile touched Detective Powell's face. "No, it didn't. Thanks to you." After a few more questions, The detective thanked them for their time and escorted them back to the lobby. As they were preparing to leave, she touched Harold's arm lightly. "Mr. Foster, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Harold glanced at Theo. "Wait right here by the front desk, okay? I'll be just a minute." As Harold stepped aside with the detective, Theo pretended to be interested in a bulletin board covered with community notices and wanted posters. But he positioned himself just close enough to overhear snippets of their conversation. Concerned about potential risk, Detective Powell was saying. "What kind of risk?" Harold's voice sounded alarmed. "Probably nothing, but if the mother is local, and she realizes Theo can identify her. Are you saying my grandson could be in danger?" Harold's voice rose slightly. "Just a precaution, officer doing extra patrols in your neighborhood." Theo quickly moved away from the bulletin board as Harold turned back toward him. His face composed, but a new worry line etched between his brows. "Ready to go, buddy?" Harold asked, his voice forcibly cheerful. Theo nodded, pretending he hadn't heard anything. But as they walked to the car, he found himself glancing over his shoulder more than once, suddenly aware of how many strangers passed by, how any of them could be connected to what had happened to Phoenix. The drive home was quiet, Harold lost in thought and Theo processing everything he'd learned. When they pulled into their driveway, Harold turned off the engine but made no move to get out of the car. "Theo," he said finally, "Detective Powell mentioned that they'll be having an officer drive by our house a few extra times each day, just as a precaution. Because of what happened to Phoenix?" Harold hesitated. "Yes, there's no reason to be alarmed, but until they find the person responsible, they want to make sure we're safe." "Because I can identify the girl in the video," Theo said bluntly. Harold looked startled. "You heard that?" "Not all of it, but enough." Theo unbuckled his seatbelt. "It's okay, Grandpa. I'm not scared." Harold studied his grandson's face. "Maybe you should be just a little. Enough to be careful. No more going out alone to collect cans, at least for now. And you come straight home from school, no detours. What about visiting Phoenix at the hospital?" "That should be fine, as long as I'm with you." Harold reached over and squeezed Theo's shoulder. "I've already emailed your dad about what happened. He hasn't responded yet, he's probably on duty. But I'm going to ask if he can request compassionate leave to come home for a while." Theo's heart leapt at this possibility. "Really? You think they'd let him?" "It's worth a try. This is an unusual situation." Harold got out of the car and waited for Theo to do the same. "In the meantime, let's try to keep things as normal as possible. How about some lunch?" Inside the house, Harold busied himself making sandwiches while Theo sat at the kitchen table, leafing through his mythology book. He'd had it since his mother was alive. It had been one of her favorites as a child, with vivid illustrations and stories from cultures around the world. He found the section on the Phoenix and read it again, tracing the illustration with his finger. The magnificent bird rising from flames, its wings spread wide, its eyes defiant. The caption read, "The Phoenix, symbol of rebirth, renewal, and triumph over adversity." "That's perfect for her," he murmured. "What's that?" Harold asked, setting a sandwich in front of him. "Phoenix," Theo replied. "It's the perfect name for her." Harold smiled sadly. "It is a good name. But remember, buddy, the hospital and social services will decide what to call her officially." "They should ask me," Theo said with unusual assertiveness. "I found her." Harold didn't argue, just patted Theo's hand. "Eat your lunch. Then maybe we could play a game or watch a movie. Something to take our minds off all this for a while." But taking his mind off all this proved impossible for Theo. Even as they set up the chessboard Harold had been teaching him to play, though Theo suspected his grandfather let him win more often than not. His thoughts kept circling back to the baby in the hospital, to the girl in the security footage, and to the unimaginable connection between them. When the doorbell rang unexpectedly, both Theo and Harold jumped. "Stay here," Harold said, rising from the table with surprising quickness for a man his age. Theo watched as his grandfather approached the front door cautiously, peering through the peephole before visibly relaxing and opening the door. "Ms. Wilson," Harold greeted their neighbor. Is everything all right? I just wanted to check on you too, Ms. Wilson said, stepping inside. She was carrying a foil-covered dish. And to bring you this casserole. I figured with everything going on, cooking might be the last thing on your mind. That's very thoughtful, Harold said, accepting the dish. Ms. Wilson looked past him to where Theo sat at the kitchen table. And how are you doing, young man? You're quite the hero around the neighborhood, you know? Theo blinked in surprise. I am. Word travels fast in Portland, Ms. Wilson said with a smile. Mrs. Peterson told her daughter, who told her book club, and, well, people are impressed by what you did. Theo shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He hadn't thought about other people knowing. I just did what anyone would do. Ms. Wilson's expression softened. No, sweetie. Not just anyone would have had the presence of mind to do what you did. She turned back to Harold. How is the baby doing? Any update? As Harold filled Ms. Wilson in on Phoenix's condition, Theo returned to his mythology book, only half listening to their conversation. Felt strange to be called a hero. He hadn't done anything special, had he? He just reacted. Anyone would have done the same, wouldn't they? The question lingered as the afternoon wore on. After Ms. Wilson left, Harold suggested they watch a movie. Theo agreed, though his attention kept drifting from the screen. By the time dinner rolled around, he was quieter than usual, picking at the reheated casserole without much appetite. Penny for your thoughts, Harold said gently. Theo looked up. Ms. Wilson called me a hero. You are, Harold affirmed. But I don't feel like one, Theo confessed. I was scared the whole time, and I didn't do anything special. Harold set down his fork. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, Theo. It means you do the right thing even though you are scared. He reached across the table and took Theo's hand. And trust me, what you did was special. Not everyone would have noticed that cry. Not everyone would have investigated. Not everyone would have known what to do. Theo considered this. I just thought about what Dad would do. He's the real hero. Your father would be the first to tell you that you're the hero in this story, Harold replied with absolute certainty. Speaking of which, I checked my email while you were getting ready for dinner. Your dad responded. Theo perked up immediately. What did he say? He's incredibly proud of you, first of all, and he's going to request compassionate leave. He can't promise anything, but he's going to try. For the first time since finding Phoenix, Theo felt a genuine smile spread across his face. Really? He might come home. He's going to do his best, Harold said, clearly trying to manage expectations. Military deployments are complicated, especially for medical personnel. But he's going to make the request. The possibility of seeing his father in person rather than on a glitchy video call was enough to improve Theo's mood considerably. He ate more of his dinner and even helped with the dishes afterward without being asked. As bedtime approached, Theo went through his usual routine. Brush teeth, wash face, put on pajamas. But when Harold came to say goodnight, Theo had an unusual request. Grandpa, can we call the hospital? Just to check on Phoenix. Harold hesitated. It's pretty late, buddy. Please? I just want to know she's okay. I keep seeing her in the dumpster, all blue and cold. Understanding dawned in Harold's eyes. You're having flashbacks. That's completely normal after a traumatic experience. I just need to know she's warm now, Theo said softly. Harold nodded. Let me see what I can do. He left the room and returned a few minutes later with the cordless phone. I called the main hospital number and got transferred to the NICU. Nurse Abernathy is actually on duty tonight, and she said Phoenix is doing well. Her temperature is stable, and she's taking her feedings. Relief washed over Theo. She's not cold anymore? Not at all. Nurse Abernathy said she's snug as a bug in a rug in her incubator. Theo smiled slightly at the childish phrase. Good. Harold sat on the edge of the bed. She also said that the social worker has been notified of your suggestion for her name. They're actually considering using Phoenix as her temporary name. Apparently, several of the staff have already started calling her that. This news brought a wider smile to Theo's face. Really? They're using my name. It seems to have struck a chord, Harold confirmed. Now, think you can sleep better knowing she's safe and warm? Theo nodded, already feeling his eyelids growing heavy. The day had been exhausting emotionally and physically. As Harold turned out the light and closed the door partway, Theo pulled his blanket up to his chin. "Good night, Phoenix," he whispered into the darkness. "Stay strong." The Good Value Market was busier than usual the next morning. Saturday always brought in more customers, but there seemed to be an extra buzz in the air, a current of excitement running through the normally mundane grocery store. "There he is," someone whispered as Theo walked in with his grandfather. "That's the boy who saved the baby." Harold had been reluctant to go out at all, preferring to stay home where it was safe, but they needed groceries, and Theo had argued that they couldn't hide forever. Besides, he was curious whether Jason would be working, whether he could confirm the identity of the girl in the security footage. "Let's make this quick," Harold murmured, grabbing a basket instead of a cart. "Just the essentials today." They moved efficiently through the store, Harold consulting his short list while Theo trailed alongside him. Several people smiled at them, more than usual, and one elderly woman actually stopped Harold to say, "You raised a fine young man there." By the time they reached the checkout, Theo was uncomfortable with all the attention. People were looking at him like he was something special, something different. But inside, he still felt like the same Theo he'd always been. "Hello there," the cashier greeted them warmly. "Finding everything okay today?" "Yes, thank you," Harold replied, placing their items on the conveyor belt. The cashier, her name tag read Dorothy, began scanning their groceries. "You're Theo, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes bright with interest. "The boy who found that poor baby?" Theo nodded uncomfortably. "Such a brave thing you did," Dorothy continued. "Everyone's been talking about it. Just terrible what happened to that little one. Have they found who did it yet?" "The police are investigating," Harold answered diplomatically, placing a protective hand on Theo's shoulder. As Dorothy bagged their groceries, Theo scanned the store, looking for Jason or the girl from the security footage. Neither seemed to be working today. "Do you know if Jason Martinez is working today?" he asked Dorothy. The cashier looked surprised by the question. "Jason? No, he's not scheduled until this afternoon." "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," Theo replied vaguely. Harold quickly paid for their groceries and guided Theo toward the exit. "Remember what Detective Powell said," he murmured close to Theo's ear. "We're not supposed to be asking questions or involving ourselves in the investigation." "I know," Theo conceded. "I was just curious." As they approached the automatic doors, a stocky man in a store manager's uniform intercepted them. "Excuse me," he said. "You're Theo Foster, aren't you? The boy who found the baby behind our store?" Harold tensed beside him. "Yes, he is, and we're in a bit of a hurry." The manager nodded understanding but pressed on. "I just wanted to express how horrified we were to learn what happened on our property. We've been fully cooperating with the police investigation, of course. And we wanted to give Theo something, just a small token of appreciation for his quick thinking." He held out a gift card. "It's not much, just $50 to spend in our store. But we wanted to do something to acknowledge what you did." Before Harold could respond, Theo spoke up. "No, thank you," he said firmly. The manager blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry. I don't want a reward," Theo explained. "I didn't do it for money or attention. I just did what anyone would do." An uncomfortable silence followed, broken when Harold cleared his throat. "That's very generous of you," he said to the manager. But as Theo said, he doesn't feel comfortable accepting a reward. "However, if you'd like to make a donation to the children's hospital in the baby's name, I'm sure that would be appreciated." The manager nodded, looking slightly relieved to have a resolution. "Of course, that's a wonderful suggestion. We'll do that instead." As they finally exited the store and walked to their car, Harold gave Theo's shoulder a squeeze. "That was a mature decision, Theo. I'm proud of you." Theo shrugged. "It didn't feel right. Phoenix is the one who needs things, not me." Harold smiled sadly. "You're right about that. They were loading the groceries into the trunk when Theo noticed a girl approaching the store from the far end of the parking lot. She wore a hooded jacket and carried a backpack slung over one shoulder. Something about her walk, about the way she kept her head down, sparked recognition. "Grandpa," Theo whispered urgently. "That's her. The girl from the video." Harold looked up sharply, following Theo's gaze. "Are you sure?" Theo nodded, watching as the girl entered the store through the automatic doors. "Pretty sure. Should we tell Detective Powell?" Harold was already pulling out his phone. "Yes, but we're not going to confront her ourselves. Get in the car, Theo. Now." As Harold made the call, Theo buckled his seatbelt and watched the store entrance. He wondered what the girl was thinking, whether she knew people were looking for her, whether she ever thought about the baby she'd left in the cold. "Detective Powell is sending an officer right away," Harold reported, putting the phone away. "She asked us not to leave yet. They may need you to make a positive ID. But we're to stay in the car, understand?" Theo nodded, eyes still fixed on the store entrance. "Do you think she knows? That Phoenix survived?" "I don't know," Harold answered truthfully. "Maybe. The story has been on the local news." They sat in tense silence for about 10 minutes before a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, followed shortly by Detective Powell's unmarked car. The officers entered the store while Detective Powell approached their vehicle. "Mr. Foster, Theo," she greeted them, bending slightly to speak through the driver's side window. "You believe you've spotted our person of interest?" Theo did, Harold confirmed. "A girl matching the description from the security footage just entered the store. He thinks she's an employee." Detective Powell nodded. "We're checking now. I'd like Theo to confirm the identification, but I don't want to do it in a way that might alert her. Can Theo come with me to the manager's office? There's a security feed of the store floor we can look at." Harold looked uncertain. "Is that necessary?" "It would be extremely helpful," Detective Powell replied. "We need to be certain before we approach her." After a moment's hesitation, Harold agreed. "All right, but I'm coming too." Inside the store, they were led discreetly to a small office in the back, where the store manager waited with several security monitors displaying different areas of the store. Detective Powell quickly explained what they needed. "Show me all employees currently on the floor," she requested. The manager clicked through several camera views until they had a clear image of a young woman stocking shelves in the canned goods aisle. She wore the same hooded jacket Theo had seen outside, though the hood was down now, revealing dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Is that her?" Detective Powell asked Theo. Theo studied the grainy image carefully. "I think so. Can you see her face better?" The manager adjusted the camera angle, zooming in slightly as the girl turned to reach for another can. Her profile came into clear view. A pale face, dark circles under her eyes, a slight bruise on her cheekbone that hadn't been visible in the security footage from the gas station. "That's her," Theo confirmed with more certainty. "She bags groceries sometimes. I've seen her here before." Detective Powell nodded. "Do you have employee records?" she asked the manager. "Of course." The manager pulled up a file on his computer. "That's Lily Winters. She's been working here part-time for about 6 months. Quiet girl, good worker. Is she in some kind of trouble?" "We just need to speak with her," Detective Powell said neutrally. "Does she know you're watching her on the security cameras right now?" The manager shook his head. "Employees know there are cameras, but they don't know when we're actively monitoring." "Good. I'd like to approach her discreetly." "Mr. Foster, Theo, I'll need you to wait here until we've spoken with Ms. Winters." Harold nodded agreement. "Of course." They watched on the monitor as Detective Powell and one uniformed officer approached Lily in the canned goods aisle. The girl's body language changed immediately. Her shoulders tensed, her posture became defensive. Though there was no audio, it was clear that Detective Powell was speaking to her calmly, showing her badge. After a brief conversation, Lily seemed to deflate, her resistance crumbling. She nodded once, then followed the officers toward the back of the store. "They're bringing her to the employee break room for initial questioning," the manager explained. "More private than doing it on the sales floor." Theo watched the screen as Lily disappeared from view, a strange mix of emotions churning inside him. This girl, this ordinary-looking teenager who stocked shelves and bagged groceries, had left a newborn baby to die in a dumpster, had burned her with cigarettes, had tried to strangle her. It seemed impossible to reconcile the mundane image on the security monitor with the monstrous acts Phoenix had suffered. "Will she go to jail?" Theo asked again. The manager looked uncomfortable. "I should get back to the floor," he said, excusing himself and leaving Theo and Harold alone in the office. "It's complicated, Theo," Harold said once they were alone. "She's very young, probably a juvenile in the eyes of the law. And we don't know her circumstances." "What circumstances could make it okay to hurt a baby?" Theo demanded, an uncharacteristic flash of anger in his voice. Harold placed a calming hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Nothing makes it okay. But Detective Powell was right when she said sometimes people do terrible things because they're in terrible situations themselves." Before Theo could argue further, there was a knock at the office door. Detective Powell entered, her expression grave. "Thank you for your help," she said. "We've taken Ms. Winters into custody for questioning. She'll be transported to the station." "Did she confess?" Harold asked. Detective Powell hesitated. "I can't share details of an ongoing investigation, but I will say that Ms. Winters is cooperating with us." She turned to Theo. "Your identification was very helpful, Theo. You have good observational skills. Will Phoenix be safe now?" Theo asked. A shadow crossed Detective Powell's face. "We're still investigating all aspects of this case. But yes, I believe the immediate danger to the baby has passed." Something in her tone made Theo uneasy. "What aren't you telling us?" Detective Powell smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "You're perceptive, too. Look, Ms. Winters has shared some concerning information. The situation is more complex than we initially thought. There may be another person involved. Someone who posed a greater threat to both Phoenix and Ms. Winters herself." "Who?" Theo asked immediately. "I can't disclose that at this time," Detective Powell replied. "But I want to assure you both that we're taking appropriate measures to ensure everyone's safety." Harold's expression grew concerned. "Including ours?" "Yes," Detective Powell confirmed. "We'll have increased patrols in your neighborhood, as discussed. And I'd like you to be extra vigilant for the next few days. Report anything unusual immediately." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Theo looked at his grandfather, seeing worry etched in the lines of his face. "We should go home," Harold said, standing up. "Thank you, Detective." As they drove home in silence, Theo gazed out the window at the familiar streets of Portland. Everything looked the same as it had before. The same storefronts, the same snow-lined sidewalks, the same winter clouds hanging low in the sky. But nothing felt the same. The world had revealed a darker side, one where babies were abandoned and teenagers harbored terrible secrets. Yet amid that darkness, there was Phoenix, tiny, resilient, fighting for life in her hospital incubator. And there was Detective Powell working to bring justice. And there was his grandfather beside him, steadfast and protective. "Grandpa," Theo said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yes, buddy? I want to visit Phoenix tomorrow, to read to her. Nurse Abernathy said it might help her to hear voices." Harold smiled, the worry lines around his eyes softening slightly. "I think that's a wonderful idea." As they unloaded groceries and stepped into the safety of their home, Theo felt a strange sense of purpose settling over him. Phoenix had survived against the odds. Now it was his job to make sure she knew she wasn't alone in the world. The investigation would continue. Adults would make decisions about Phoenix's future. But for now, in this moment, Theo knew exactly where he needed to be. Standing beside the incubator of a baby who had no one else, letting her know that someone had heard her cry. 3 days had passed since Lily Winters was taken into custody. 3 days of Detective Powell's careful updates, revealing only the barest minimum of information. 3 days of increased police patrols past the foster home. 3 days of Theo sitting by Phoenix's incubator, reading stories from his mythology book while the NICU machines beeped a steady rhythm around them. On this particular morning, Theo noticed changes in Phoenix immediately. Her color was better, a healthy pink rather than the waxy pallor of those first days. She'd been moved from the critical care section to a standard NICU incubator. Most noticeable of all, some of the tubes and wires had been removed. "She's looking stronger," Nurse Abernathy commented as she checked Phoenix's vital signs. In the days since Theo had started visiting, he'd come to appreciate the nurse's straightforward manner. She never sugar-coated information or spoke to him as if he were too young to understand. "When can she leave the hospital?" Theo asked, watching as Phoenix's tiny fingers curled reflexively around the edge of her blanket. "Soon, I'd imagine," Nurse Abernathy replied. "Her feeding tube came out yesterday, and she's taking a bottle well. The burns are healing nicely." She glanced at Harold, who sat in a chair by the door leafing through a magazine. "The social worker will be making those decisions, of course." Theo nodded, having heard variations of this answer before. Adults were always making decisions about Phoenix, decisions he wasn't privy to despite being the one who'd saved her life. "I brought a new book today," he said, pulling a slim volume from his backpack. "It's about stars and constellations. My mom used to read it to me when I was little." Nurse Abernathy smiled. "That sounds perfect. She seems to respond to your voice, you know. Her heart rate steadies when you're reading." This information pleased Theo enormously. He settled into the chair beside Phoenix's incubator, opening the book to the first page. "Today we're going to learn about the night sky," he began, his voice soft but clear. "Did you know that some of the stars we see are actually entire galaxies? And some of the stars we see aren't even there anymore. Their light is just reaching us now, after traveling for millions of years." He was so absorbed in his reading that he didn't notice the woman observing him from the doorway until she cleared her throat gently. Theo looked up to find a slender woman in a neat pantsuit watching him with an expression of interest. "Don't stop on my account," she said warmly. "I'm Ms. Patel, the social worker assigned to Phoenix's case." Theo closed the book. "Are you the one who gets to decide where she goes when she leaves the hospital?" "That's part of my job, yes?" Ms. Patel confirmed, stepping fully into the room. She nodded a greeting to Harold, who had looked up from his magazine. "I understand you're Theo Foster, Phoenix's rescuer." "I just found her," Theo corrected automatically. "The doctors saved her." Ms. Patel smiled. "From what I hear, you did much more than just find her. You carried her through freezing weather, kept her warm, and got her to the emergency room in time. That's quite remarkable for anyone, let alone someone your age." Theo shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "What's going to happen to her?" Ms. Patel moved closer to the incubator, looking down at Phoenix with a professional but gentle gaze. "Well, she'll be discharged from the hospital soon, possibly within the week. At that point, she'll be placed with a foster family who specializes in caring for infants with medical needs." "What about her mother, Lily?" Theo couldn't help asking. Miss Patel glanced at Harold, clearly measuring how much to say. "That situation is complicated. The legal proceedings are ongoing." "But she hurt Phoenix," Theo insisted, a flash of anger in his voice. "She tried to—" He broke off, unwilling to say the terrible words aloud. Ms. Patel's expression softened. "Theo, I understand your concern. But juvenile cases are confidential, and there are aspects of this situation that aren't straightforward. Detective Powell is handling the criminal investigation while I focus on what's best for Phoenix moving forward." Harold stood and moved to stand behind Theo, placing a supportive hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Ms. Patel, we understand the need for privacy in these matters. Theo just feels connected to Phoenix. He wants to know she'll be safe." "That's completely understandable," Ms. Patel assured them. "And I can tell you that Phoenix's safety is our absolute top priority. The foster family we're considering has an excellent record and extensive experience with infants who have experienced trauma." "Will I still be able to visit her?" Theo asked, his voice smaller now. Ms. Patel hesitated. "That would be up to the foster family. It's not typical protocol, but given the unique circumstances, I can certainly discuss it with them. Please, Theo said. She knows me. She responds to my voice. It's true, Nurse Abernathy interjected from where she was updating Phoenix's chart. Her vitals show a positive response when Theo reads to her. Ms. Patel looked thoughtful. I'll make note of that in my report. She consulted her watch. I need to head to another appointment, but it was good to meet you both. I've heard so much about you, Theo. After she left, Theo turned to his grandfather. She didn't really tell us anything, did she? Harold sighed. Adults are complicated, Theo. There are rules about what information can be shared, especially when it involves children. Phoenix is a child too, Theo pointed out. Doesn't she deserve to know what's happening? She's a bit young for that, Harold said with a gentle smile. But you're right that everyone deserves clarity and safety. The people handling her case are trying to provide that. Theo returned to his book, but his concentration was broken. He read mechanically for a while longer before closing it. Can we go see Detective Powell? Harold looked surprised. Today? I don't think that's necessary, Theo. She'll contact us if there are any developments. Theo struggled to articulate the restlessness he felt. I need to know what's happening with the investigation. Please, Grandpa. Harold studied his grandson's earnest face before nodding reluctantly. We can try. She might be busy, though. They said goodbye to Phoenix and Nurse Abernathy, promising to return the next day. As they drove to the police station, Theo stared out the window, watching as Portland passed by in a blur of winter-gray buildings and dirty snow. At the station, they were told Detective Powell was out but expected back shortly. They waited in the now-familiar family room, Theo fidgeting impatiently while Harold flipped through a worn magazine from the stack on the table. Mr. Foster, Theo. Detective Powell's voice came from the doorway about 20 minutes later. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting long hours. This is a surprise. I'm sorry to bother you, Harold began, but Theo interrupted. We want to know what's happening with Lily and Phoenix, he said bluntly. No one will tell us anything. Detective Powell's expression shifted subtly, part sympathy, part professional reserve. I understand your frustration. Come have a seat. She closed the door and settled into a chair across from them. I can share some information, but I need you both to understand that much of this investigation remains confidential. We understand, Harold assured her. Detective Powell nodded. Lily Winters is currently in juvenile detention, pending a hearing. She's 17 years old, still a minor in the eyes of the law. What I can tell you is that her home situation was problematic. What does that mean? Theo asked. It means, Detective Powell said carefully, that Lily was living in an abusive environment. Her mother's boyfriend, a man named Victor Reeves, has a history of violent behavior. According to Lily, he was... She paused, glancing at Harold as if seeking permission to continue. Theo has already been exposed to a great deal in this situation, Harold said quietly. I think clarity might be better than leaving him to imagine the worst. Detective Powell nodded. According to Lily, Reeves was the father of the baby. He had been abusing Lily for over a year, and her mother either didn't know or chose not to intervene. Theo's eyes widened as he processed this information. Even at 8, he understood enough about the world to grasp the terrible implication of what the detective was saying. When Lily realized she was pregnant, she hid it from everyone, Detective Powell continued. She was afraid of what Reeves might do. When she went into labor, she delivered the baby alone in her bathroom while her mother was at work and Reeves was out drinking. And then she tried to hurt Phoenix, Theo said, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. Detective Powell's expression grew even more somber. That's where the story becomes even more disturbing. Lily claims that Reeves came home unexpectedly and found her with the newborn. He became enraged, burned the baby with his cigarette, and attempted to strangle her. Then he ordered Lily to get rid of it immediately. Harold inhaled sharply. My God! Lily says she was terrified for her own life and the baby's. She wrapped the baby in a towel and left the house, intending to take her to a safe haven location. There's a fire station just a few blocks from her home, but Reeves followed her in his car, watching to make sure she handled it. In panic, she detoured to the Good Value Market and placed the baby in the dumpster, hoping someone would find her quickly. But she used a sedative, Theo pointed out, remembering what Detective Powell had told them previously, to keep Phoenix quiet. Yes, Detective Powell acknowledged. She admits to crushing one of her mother's sleeping pills and rubbing it on the baby's gums. She claims she was afraid the baby's crying would attract Reeves if he was still following her. She shook her head slightly. It's a terrible situation all around. Theo sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this new information with the anger he'd been harboring toward Lily. The girl he'd glimpsed stocking shelves had seemed so ordinary. Not a monster, but not a victim either. Now he was being asked to see her differently, as someone trapped and terrified, making desperate choices. Do you believe her? Harold asked quietly. We found evidence supporting her account, Detective Powell replied. Reeves has a violent criminal history, including domestic assault charges that were later dropped. Lily's mother initially denied everything, but has since admitted that Reeves had been interested in her daughter in ways that made her uncomfortable. And the medical examination of the baby showed 2 different sets of fingerprints in the bruising around her neck, smaller ones consistent with a teenage girl, and larger ones consistent with an adult male. Where is he now? Theo asked, a new fear creeping into his voice. Reeves. That's been our primary concern, Detective Powell admitted. He disappeared after we took Lily into custody. We've had an alert out for him, which is why we increased patrols around your neighborhood. You think he might come after Theo? Harold asked, alarm evident in his voice. It's a precaution, Detective Powell said. Reeves knows the baby survived, and he knows it was found by a child. Local news coverage has been minimal on Theo's identity, but in a community this size, people talk, Harold finished grimly. Detective Powell nodded. However, I do have some good news on that front. Reeves was apprehended this morning attempting to cross into Canada at the Maine-New Brunswick border. He's in custody and facing multiple serious charges. Relief washed over Harold's face. So the threat is contained? Yes, Detective Powell confirmed. But we're maintaining the increased patrols for now just to be thorough. Theo had been quiet, processing all this information. What about Lily? He finally asked. Will she go to jail for what she did to Phoenix? Detective Powell considered her words carefully. The district attorney is reviewing the case. Lily's actions were serious, but given her age and circumstances, there are many factors to consider. She may face charges, but likely not as an adult, and with significant mitigating circumstances. But she left Phoenix to die, Theo insisted, still struggling to fully accept Lily's explanation. She made terrible choices under terrible circumstances, Detective Powell acknowledged. The legal system will have to determine the appropriate consequences. But it's worth noting that she's been extremely cooperative, providing evidence against Reeves and expressing genuine remorse about the baby. Harold placed a hand on Theo's shoulder. Justice is complicated sometimes, buddy. It's not always black and white. Theo nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. Can I ask one more thing? Of course, Detective Powell replied. Could I meet her? Lily, both adults looked startled by the request. Theo, I'm not sure that's, Harold began. Why would you want to do that? Detective Powell asked, her tone curious rather than dismissive. Theo considered the question seriously. Because I need to understand. And because Phoenix can't ask her own questions yet. Someday she might want to know why. Detective Powell's expression softened. That's a very mature perspective, Theo. But I'm afraid it's not possible right now. Lily is in a secure juvenile facility, and there are strict rules about visitation. Maybe someday, Harold suggested gently, when all of this is further behind us. Theo accepted this answer, though not without disappointment. As they prepared to leave, Detective Powell walked them to the lobby. "There's one more thing you should know," she said quietly. "The medical examiner estimates that Phoenix was in that dumpster for less than 30 minutes before you found her, Theo. If Lily's timeline is accurate, that means you arrived almost immediately after she left. A few minutes later, and the outcome might have been very different." The weight of this near miss settled on Theo's shoulders. All the small choices that had led him to that spot at that precise moment, deciding to collect cans that evening, choosing to check behind Good Value rather than heading straight home, hearing the faint cry that could easily have been lost in the wind, suddenly seemed enormously significant. "It wasn't just coincidence, was it?" he asked his grandfather as they walked to the car. Harold squeezed his shoulder. "I don't believe so, no. Some people might call it fate or divine intervention. Whatever you call it, you were exactly where you needed to be exactly when you needed to be there." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the revelations of the day. As they turned onto their street, Harold broke the silence. "Your father called while you were reading to Phoenix this morning. I didn't want to interrupt you." Theo perked up immediately. "What did he say? Is he coming home?" "His request for compassionate leave has been approved," Harold confirmed, a smile breaking across his weathered face. "He'll be here in 3 days." The news was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Really? He's really coming?" "Really," Harold affirmed. "For 2 weeks. It's not as long as he'd hoped, but it's something." For the first time in days, Theo felt a surge of uncomplicated joy. His father was coming home. The man who had been reduced to a pixelated image on video calls for the past 2 years would be physically present, solid and real. But even as he celebrated this news, his thoughts circled back to Phoenix. By the time his father arrived, she might already be placed with her foster family. Would they allow him to visit? Would she remember his voice if too much time passed? That evening, as Harold prepared dinner, the phone rang. Theo, setting the table, heard his grandfather's voice shift from casual greeting to focused attention. "Yes, this is Harold Foster. Yes, he's here. When?" "I see. Yes, we could do that." When Harold hung up, his expression was unreadable. That was Ms. Patel, the social worker. "Is something wrong with Phoenix?" Theo asked immediately, his heart rate accelerating. No, Harold assured him. "Quite the opposite. She's being discharged from the hospital tomorrow. Ms. Patel wanted to know if we'd be willing to come in the morning. Apparently, Phoenix becomes distressed when she doesn't hear your voice for more than a day." Relief flooded through Theo. "Of course we'll go." "There's more," Harold continued. "The foster placement has been arranged. A couple named the Williamsons will be taking her. They've been foster parents for nearly a decade, specializing in medically fragile infants." "Where do they live?" Theo asked, already calculating how difficult it might be to visit. "South Portland," Harold replied. "Not too far. And here's the interesting part. Miss Patel spoke with them about your unique connection to Phoenix. They've agreed to allow regular visits, at least initially, to help with her transition." Theo set down the plates he'd been holding, a smile spreading across his face. "Really? I can keep seeing her?" "Within reason," Harold cautioned. "They're doing us a favor by breaking protocol. We'll need to be respectful of their schedule and Phoenix's needs." "I will be," Theo promised solemnly. "I just want to make sure she's okay." Harold studied his grandson's earnest face. "You know, Theo, most children your age would have moved on by now. Found new interests, new distractions." Theo considered this. "I can't explain it, Grandpa. I just feel responsible for her, like we're connected somehow." Harold nodded, understanding. "Sometimes life creates bonds that defy simple explanation. I felt that way when your grandmother first placed your father in my arms. One look, and I knew I'd do anything to protect him." The comparison made Theo uncomfortable for reasons he couldn't articulate. "I'm not trying to be Phoenix's parent or anything," he clarified quickly. "I just want to make sure she's not alone." "I know, buddy," Harold assured him, "and it's a beautiful thing to witness." The next morning, they arrived at the hospital early. The NICU was busier than usual, with several nurses moving efficiently between incubators, checking monitors and adjusting settings. Nurse Abernathy greeted them with a smile. Perfect timing. Phoenix just had her bath and final checkup. Dr. Rivera has officially cleared her for discharge. Theo approached the incubator, immediately noticing changes. Phoenix was dressed in a proper baby outfit, a pale yellow sleeper with tiny ducks printed on it, rather than the hospital-issued garments she'd worn previously. Her color was healthy, her movements more vigorous than they had been. "She looks good," he observed, smiling as Phoenix's tiny hand emerged from her blanket, fingers splaying in a stretch. "She's a fighter," Nurse Abernathy agreed. "Given where she started, her recovery has been remarkable." "Can I?" Theo hesitated. "Could I hold her? Just once, before she goes?" Nurse Abernathy glanced around before lowering her voice. "Technically, only parents or authorized caregivers are supposed to hold NICU babies. But in this case," she looked at Harold. "Would that be all right with you, Mr. Foster?" Harold nodded. "I think it would be important for both of them." "Wash your hands thoroughly," Nurse Abernathy instructed, pointing Theo toward the sink. "Then sit in that rocking chair." Theo did as instructed, his heart pounding with unexpected nervousness. He'd saved this baby's life, had visited her nearly every day, had read countless stories to her, but he'd never actually held her, had never felt her weight in his arms. After he was seated, Nurse Abernathy carefully lifted Phoenix from the incubator, supporting her head and bundled body. "Cradle your arms like this," she demonstrated. "Always support the head. Her neck muscles aren't strong enough yet." And then, with a gentle transfer, Phoenix was in his arms. She was heavier than Theo had expected, a solid, warm presence against his chest. Her eyes, a deep blue-gray that Dr. Rivera said might change color as she grew older, blinked open, regarding him with what seemed like solemn curiosity. "Hi, Phoenix," Theo whispered. "It's me, the boy who's been reading to you." To his amazement, the baby's expression seemed to relax at the sound of his voice. Her tiny fingers flexed, and one hand escaped the blanket, reaching upward. "She recognizes your voice?" Nurse Abernathy said softly, watching them with a smile. Theo held perfectly still, afraid any movement might disturb this perfect moment. Phoenix continued to gaze at him, her eyes eventually drifting closed, her breathing becoming deep and rhythmic. "She feels safe with you," Harold observed from where he stood watching. The simple statement created a warm glow in Theo's chest. Amid all the confusion and darkness of the past week, this moment felt pure and uncomplicated. A small human who had entered the world in violence and fear, now peaceful in the arms of someone who had heard her cry when no one else did. The sound of the door opening broke the spell. Ms. Patel entered, accompanied by a couple Theo didn't recognize. The woman was tall with curly auburn hair and kind eyes. The man was solidly built with salt and pepper hair and a neat beard. "Ah, I see you've met already," Ms. Patel said with a smile. "Theo, Mr. Foster, these are the Williamsons, Brian and Lisa. They'll be Phoenix's foster parents." Theo felt a sudden, irrational reluctance to relinquish Phoenix, but he nodded a greeting. "She just fell asleep," he whispered. Lisa Williamson approached slowly, her smile gentle. "You must be Theo. We've heard so much about you. You're the boy who saved her," Brian added, his voice a quiet rumble that matched his appearance. "I just found her," Theo corrected automatically. "Everyone keeps saying I saved her, but the doctors did that part." Lisa knelt beside the rocking chair, bringing herself to Theo's eye level. "Finding her was the crucial part," she said softly. "Without that, none of the medical care would have mattered." She looked at Phoenix's sleeping face. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Theo nodded, studying the Williamsons with cautious assessment. They seemed kind, and Ms. Patel clearly trusted them. But they were strangers who would be taking Phoenix away. "Ms. Patel says you've been reading to her," Brian commented. "That you have a special connection. She calms down when she hears my voice," Theo explained. "Nurse Abernathy says her heart rate steadies." The Williamsons exchanged a glance loaded with communication Theo couldn't interpret. "That kind of bond is precious," Lisa said. We'd like to honor it, if you're willing. Ms. Patel mentioned you might want to visit sometimes. I promised I'd keep reading to her, Theo confirmed. If that's okay with you. More than okay, Brian assured him. We've fostered many infants over the years, and we've learned that consistency and connection are vitally important. If Phoenix has formed an attachment to you, that's something to be nurtured, not broken. Relief washed over Theo. Thank you. Perhaps you could come once a week? Lisa suggested. Sunday afternoons, maybe? We could set up a regular time. That would be perfect, Harold interjected. Theo's father is coming home on leave in a few days. I'm sure he'd be happy to drive Theo to these visits when I'm not able to. As the adults worked out the logistics, Nurse Abernathy approached. I hate to interrupt, but we need to complete the discharge paperwork. Mrs. Williamson, would you like to hold Phoenix while we go through the forms? The moment of transfer had arrived. Theo looked down at the sleeping infant in his arms, memorizing the peaceful expression on her tiny face. Goodbye for now, he whispered. See you on Sunday. With Nurse Abernathy's guidance, he carefully passed Phoenix to Lisa, who cradled her with the practiced ease of someone who had held many babies before. Phoenix stirred slightly but didn't wake, settling into her new caregiver's arms with the same trust she'd shown Theo. She likes you? Theo observed, feeling a strange mixture of loss and reassurance. Lisa smiled. We'll take good care of her, Theo. I promise. As they completed the discharge process, Theo and Harold waited in the hallway. Theo's emotions were a confusing tangle. Happiness that Phoenix was healthy enough to leave the hospital, satisfaction that the Williamsons seemed kind and experienced, anxiety about her continued well-being, and a hollow feeling he couldn't quite name. You okay, buddy? Harold asked, noting his grandson's pensive expression. Yeah, Theo said after a moment. I just hope she'll be happy there. The Williamsons seem like good people, Harold reassured him. And you'll still get to see her regularly. That's a better outcome than we might have expected. Theo nodded agreement, though the hollow feeling persisted. When Ms. Patel and the Williamsons emerged with Phoenix now secured in an infant car seat, bundled against the winter cold, he felt a spike of anxiety. We'll see you Sunday, Lisa reminded him, touching his shoulder gently. 2 o'clock. I'll be there, Theo promised. Should I bring books? Absolutely, Brian confirmed. Whatever you've been reading to her. Continuity is important. As they watched the Williamsons carry Phoenix away, Nurse Abernathy approached with something in her hand. I thought you might want this, she said, holding out a small card. It's her hospital bracelet. Normally we just discard them after discharge. But, well, I thought this one was special. Theo accepted the tiny plastic band that had circled Phoenix's wrist during her hospital stay. It read, Baby DOE, female, followed by a hospital ID number and the date. The date he'd found her. Thank you, he said, curling his fingers around the bracelet. It wasn't much, but it was a tangible reminder of the connection they shared. As they left the hospital, Theo felt oddly unmoored. For the past week, his days had been structured around hospital visits, around reading to Phoenix, around the rhythms of the NICU. Now that routine was disrupted, replaced with a weekly visit to a place he'd never been, to see a baby who was no longer in crisis. It feels weird, he admitted to Harold as they drove home. Like the story is over, but it isn't really. Harold nodded, understanding. Life rarely gives us clean endings, Theo. Stories continue, they evolve. This chapter is closing, but the book goes on. Theo considered this wisdom, turning Phoenix's hospital bracelet over in his hands. I hope the next chapter is happier for her. Thanks to you, she gets to have a next chapter at all, Harold reminded him. That's something to be proud of. As they pulled into their driveway, Theo noticed a familiar car parked at the curb. That's Detective Powell, he said, pointing. Sure enough, the detective was sitting in her unmarked police vehicle, apparently waiting for them. She got out as they parked, approaching with what looked like a file folder in her hand. Mr. Foster, Theo, she greeted them. Sorry to drop by unannounced. I wanted to update you in person. Is this about Reeves? Harold asked, unlocking the front door and inviting her inside. Yes, Detective Powell confirmed, following them into the living room. He's been formally charged with multiple felonies: sexual assault of a minor, child endangerment, attempted murder, and several others. He's being held without bail pending trial. Good, Theo said firmly, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. Detective Powell nodded agreement. There's more. During his interrogation, Reeves implicated Lily's mother in some of the abuse. She was aware of what was happening and failed to protect her daughter. She's also being charged. Harold shook his head in disbelief. That poor girl. To have both of the adults who should have protected her fail so completely. What will happen to Lily now? Theo asked. She's being transferred to a secure treatment facility for minors, Detective Powell explained. She'll receive counseling and education there while the legal process unfolds. The district attorney is still determining what charges, if any, will be pursued against her. And Phoenix? Harold asked. Will she ever have to testify or be involved in the legal proceedings? No, Detective Powell assured them. The evidence against Reeves is overwhelming without requiring the baby's involvement. DNA tests have confirmed he's the biological father, which corroborates Lily's testimony about the sexual abuse. As the adults continued discussing the legal ramifications, Theo felt a heaviness settle over him. The situation was so much darker, so much more complex than he had initially understood. People who should have loved and protected Lily had betrayed her in the worst possible ways. And Lily, damaged by that betrayal, had failed to protect Phoenix. It was a chain of brokenness that Theo's 8-year-old mind struggled to fully comprehend. Yet somehow he had become a link in that chain, not continuing the damage but beginning to repair it. One more thing, Detective Powell said as she prepared to leave. I wanted to give you this. She handed Theo an envelope. It's from Lily. She asked me to deliver it when I told her you'd been asking about her. Theo accepted the envelope with surprise. His name was written on the front in neat, careful handwriting. You don't have to read it, Detective Powell added gently. That's entirely your choice. After she left, Theo sat on the couch staring at the unopened envelope. Harold busied himself in the kitchen, giving his grandson space to decide. Finally, Theo carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter was short, written in the same neat handwriting as the envelope. Dear Theo, Detective Powell told me what you did, how you found my baby and saved her life. I don't have the right words to thank you. I know you must hate me for what I did. I hate myself too. I want you to know that I never meant for her to die. I was scared and stupid and weak. But that's not an excuse. There is no excuse for what I did to her. They told me you named her Phoenix. That's a beautiful name. Much better than anything I could have given her. They say she's going to be okay, that she'll grow up with people who love her and take care of her the right way. I'm writing this because I want you to know that what you did matters. You saved 2 lives that night, hers and mine. I don't know what's going to happen to me now, but whatever it is, it's better than the life I had before. Thank you for being braver than I was. Lily. Theo read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and returned it to the envelope. A complicated mix of emotions swirled inside him. Pity for Lily, lingering anger over what she'd done, and a strange sense of connection to this broken girl he'd never properly met. Grandpa, he called, walking to the kitchen doorway. Yes, Theo? Harold looked up from where he was preparing lunch. I think I understand now. About Lily, she did a terrible thing, but terrible things were done to her first. Harold nodded, recognition in his eyes. That's often how pain works in this world. It gets passed along unless someone is strong enough to absorb it without passing it on. Like Phoenix, Theo said. She got hurt, but she's not going to hurt anyone because of it. She's going to be okay. Yes, Harold agreed softly. Like Phoenix, and like you, Theo. You took on something difficult and painful when you found her, but you've handled it with remarkable grace. Theo considered this, turning Lily's letter over in his hands. I think I'm going to keep this, he decided. For Phoenix. When she's older, she might want to know. That's very thoughtful, Harold said. Now, how about lunch? Your father will be home soon, and we have a lot to do before then. The mention of his father brought a smile to Theo's face, temporarily displacing the weight of Lily's letter. 3 more days and his dad would be here. A reunion made possible by the unexpected chain of events that had begun with a faint cry from a dumpster. As they ate lunch, Theo found himself thinking about the phoenix from his mythology book. The magical bird that rose from the ashes of its former self, transformed and renewed. Perhaps that wasn't just a fitting name for the baby he'd found. Perhaps it described all of them. Lily finding a chance at healing, Theo discovering courage he hadn't known he possessed. Even the Williamsons creating family from fragments. From the darkness of what Reeves had done, something new and hopeful was emerging. Not perfect, not unmarked by what had happened, but alive and full of possibility. Phoenix indeed. The Portland International Jetport bustled with mid-morning travelers. Business people checking emails on their phones, families corralling excited children, airline staff directing the flow of humanity through security checkpoints. Theo stood rigidly between his grandfather and the large window overlooking the tarmac, his eyes fixed on the small military transport plane that had just landed. "Is that his flight?" he asked, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. Harold nodded, checking the information board once more. "That's it. Military transport from Germany. He'll need to go through customs, so it might be another 20 minutes or so." Theo nodded, trying to contain his excitement. 2 years was an eternity in the life of an 8-year-old, nearly a quarter of his entire existence. He'd been 6 when his father deployed, still grieving the loss of his mother, still believing that nightlights kept monsters away. Now he was 8, had saved a baby's life, and understood that real monsters didn't hide under beds, but sometimes lived in the same house as you. "Do I look okay?" he asked Harold, smoothing his collar for the 3rd time. Harold smiled, straightening Theo's already straight jacket. "You look perfect, buddy. Your dad wouldn't care if you were covered in mud. He'd just be happy to see you." The minutes crawled by as Theo watched the doorway where arriving passengers emerged. Finally, a trickle of uniformed personnel began appearing, some greeted by emotional family members, others striding purposefully toward the exit alone. "There!" Theo's sharp eyes spotted him first. A tall man in army fatigues, carrying a duffel bag over one shoulder, his face thinner than in their video calls but unmistakably his father. "Dad!" The word burst from Theo as he broke into a run, weaving through the crowd with the single-minded determination of a child with only one goal in sight. Major James Foster looked up at the sound, his tired face transforming as he spotted his son barreling toward him. He dropped his duffel bag just in time to catch Theo in a fierce embrace, lifting him off the ground entirely. "Look at you," James said, his voice thick with emotion as he set Theo down to examine him properly. "You've grown a foot since I last saw you." 4.5 inches, Theo corrected automatically, then broke into a grin. "Grandpa measures me on the kitchen door frame every month." James laughed, the sound rusty as if long disused. "Of course he does." He looked past Theo to where Harold approached at a more dignified pace. "Hey, Dad." Father and son embraced, Harold's weathered hand patting James's back in that particularly male gesture that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express. "Welcome home, son," Harold said simply. "Thanks for taking care of my boy," James replied, one arm still around Theo's shoulders as if afraid he might disappear. "He's been doing most of the taking care lately," Harold said with a proud smile. "Wait till you hear everything that's happened." The drive home from the airport was a jumble of overlapping stories, James sharing sanitized versions of his work at the field hospital, Theo and Harold filling him in on the everyday happenings of the past months. By mutual, unspoken agreement, they saved the story of Phoenix for when they were home, when privacy and comfort would allow for a fuller telling. At the house, James paused in the entryway, taking in the familiar surroundings with the air of a man who has been away from home so long that returning feels slightly surreal. "Nothing's changed," he observed, setting down his duffel bag. "Some things have," Harold replied meaningfully. glancing at Theo. They settled in the living room, James in Harold's usual armchair, Harold on the couch, and Theo perched on the edge of the coffee table, unable to sit still with the excitement of having his father home. "So," James said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, "I've gotten bits and pieces from Dad's emails, but I want to hear the whole story from you, Theo, about this baby you found." Theo took a deep breath and began the tale, starting with his decision to collect cans behind Good Value Market and ending with his most recent visit to Phoenix at the Williamsons' home 3 days prior. He recounted the details with the same careful precision he'd shown Detective Powell, though now his narrative included not just facts but his feelings. His fear when he'd first heard the cry, his determination as he'd carried Phoenix through the cold, his anger when he'd learned of her injuries, and his growing understanding of the complicated tragedy that had led to her abandonment. James listened without interruption, his expression shifting from concern to pride to something deeper and more complex as the story unfolded. When Theo finished, the room fell silent for a long moment. "That's," James finally said, his voice husky with emotion. "That's an extraordinary thing you did, son." Theo shrugged, uncomfortable as always with praise. "I just found her. The doctors saved her." "No," James said firmly. "Don't minimize what you did. As a doctor, I can tell you that finding her when you did, keeping her warm, getting her to the emergency room, those were the critical actions that saved her life. The medical team stabilized her. Yes, but without you, there would have been no baby to save." Put that way, Theo couldn't argue. He nodded acceptance of his father's perspective. "I'm proud of you," James continued, "more than I can express. But I'm also—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I'm concerned about how much you've been exposed to. These are heavy things for anyone to process, let alone someone your age." "I'm okay," Theo assured him. "Really. It was scary at first, but now I understand more about what happened. And Phoenix is safe with the Williamsons." James studied his son's face, noting the new maturity in his eyes. "You've changed," he observed softly. "You're still my Theo, but there's something different about you now." "He's been remarkably resilient," Harold interjected. "But having you home will help, James. He's needed his father." A shadow of guilt crossed James's face. "I know. I'm sorry it took something this dramatic to get me home, even temporarily." "It's okay, Dad," Theo said, with the simple forgiveness children often offer. "You're helping soldiers. That's important too." James reached out and drew Theo into a hug. "Nothing's more important than you, buddy. Nothing. And when this deployment ends next year, I'm requesting a stateside assignment. No more overseas tours for a while." The promise hung in the air, precious but slightly fragile. Theo had learned over the past 2 years that adult promises, even those made with the best intentions, were sometimes broken by circumstances beyond control. But he accepted this one with hope, storing it away with the other treasures he kept safe in his heart. "Now," James said, releasing Theo and adopting a lighter tone, "I believe I was promised a chance to meet this famous Phoenix. The Williamsons are expecting us on Sunday." "Yes," Theo confirmed eagerly. "They said it was fine if you came too. I've been reading to her from my astronomy book. She really likes it. Her heart rate steadies when she hears my voice." "That doesn't surprise me," James said with a smile. "You've always had a calming presence. Even as a baby yourself, you would quiet down the moment someone started reading to you." This comparison between himself and Phoenix created a warm glow in Theo's chest. It was another connection, another thread binding him to the infant he'd rescued. The day unfolded in a comfortable rhythm, the 3 foster men settling into a temporary but precious normalcy. James unpacked his duffel bag, placing a few personal items around the guest room that had once been his childhood bedroom. Harold prepared a special welcome home dinner, and Theo showed his father all the schoolwork he'd completed during their separation. That night, after Theo had gone to bed, James and Harold sat in the kitchen, sharing a quiet drink and the conversation adults reserve for when children are asleep. "How's he really been?" James asked, his voice low. "After everything that happened?" Harold considered the question. "Remarkably well, overall. He had nightmares the first few nights, would wake up convinced the baby was crying somewhere and he needed to find her. But those have mostly subsided. The regular visits to Phoenix seem to reassure him that she's safe. And the man who hurt the baby and her mother? Reeves? Dad's emails mentioned he was arrested, but I wasn't clear on the details. Harold's expression darkened. He's in custody, facing multiple serious charges. The evidence against him is substantial. Detective Powell believes he'll be sentenced to decades in prison. James nodded, relief evident in his face. Good. And the girl, Lily? What happens to her? That's more complicated, Harold admitted. She's in a secure treatment facility for minors. The district attorney is still determining what charges to pursue against her, given her age and the circumstances. And how do you feel about all this? James asked, studying his father's face. Taking care of Theo alone these past 2 years hasn't been easy. And now this situation. Harold smiled wearily. I'm old, James, not fragile. Taking care of Theo has kept me young. His expression grew more serious. But I won't pretend it hasn't been challenging. Theo needed more support than I could give him after this incident. Having you home, even temporarily, is a blessing. James reached across the table and squeezed his father's weathered hand. I'm grateful for everything you've done, Dad. And I meant what I said to Theo. I'm requesting a stateside assignment when this deployment ends. No more 2-year separations. I hope that works out, Harold said. Not unkindly, but with the realism of someone who had seen military promises broken before. For all your sakes. They talked late into the night, father and son reconnecting after months of sporadic emails and video calls. When they finally went to bed, James paused outside Theo's door, opening it slightly to check on his son. Theo slept peacefully, one arm curled around his well-worn blue blanket, a comfort object from babyhood that had recently reappeared from the depths of his closet. James watched him for a long moment, cataloging the changes in his son's face, the signs of growth that video calls hadn't fully captured. I'm here now, he whispered to the sleeping child, and I'm going to stay as close as I can. Sunday arrived bright and cold, a classic Maine winter day with crystalline skies and breath that clouded in the air. James drove them to the Williamsons' home in South Portland, following Theo's precise directions from the back seat. Turn right at the blue house. Now it's the street with the big oak tree. Their house is the yellow one with white shutters. The Williamsons lived in a cheerful colonial with a fenced yard and carefully maintained landscaping. Lisa answered the door with Phoenix cradled in one arm, her smile welcoming as she ushered them inside. You must be Major Foster, she greeted James. I'm Lisa Williamson. My husband Brian is in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee that meets military standards. James laughed, instantly at ease with her friendly manner. Any coffee that doesn't come from a mess hall will exceed my standards, I promise. Theo had eyes only for Phoenix, who was awake and alert in Lisa's arms. She looks bigger already, he observed. She's gaining weight right on schedule, Lisa confirmed. Nearly a pound since she left the hospital. She turned to James. Would you like to hold her? Theo says you're a doctor. I assume you know the proper technique. I'd be honored, James replied, carefully accepting the bundle Lisa transferred to him. Phoenix blinked up at this new face, her expression curious but not distressed. James cradled her with the practiced ease of a medical professional who had handled many infants, studying her with both clinical and personal interest. She's beautiful, he said softly, and remarkably alert for her age and early start. She's a fighter, Brian commented, emerging from the kitchen with a tray of coffee mugs. He set them down and extended a hand to James. Brian Williamson, thank you for your service, Major. As the adults exchanged pleasantries, Theo fidgeted, clearly eager for his turn with Phoenix. James noticed and smiled, transferring the baby to Theo's waiting arms. Remember to support her head, he reminded his son, though the advice was unnecessary. Theo cradled Phoenix with surprising confidence for an 8-year-old, automatically adjusting her blanket to keep her warm. Hi, Phoenix, Theo said softly. It's me. I brought my dad to meet you today. The infant's eyes fixed on Theo's face, and her tiny mouth curved in what might have been a smile or simply a reflex. Either way, the effect on Theo was profound. His entire face lit up with joy. I think she remembers me, he said, looking up at the adults with wonder. I'm sure she does, Lisa agreed. Babies recognize voices they hear regularly, especially during their early development. Brian gestured toward the living room. Why don't you take her in there, Theo? You can read to her while we chat in here for a bit. Theo nodded, carefully walking to the adjacent room with his precious cargo. James watched him go, struck by the gentle confidence his son displayed. He's remarkable with her, Lisa observed, following James's gaze. So patient and attentive. Most children his age would have lost interest by now. Theo's always been an old soul, James said, and he feels a special connection to Phoenix, given how they met. We're grateful for that connection, Brian assured him. Phoenix has thrived since coming to us, and I believe Theo's visits are part of the reason. Continuity is important for infants who've experienced trauma. As they settled around the kitchen table with their coffee, Lisa updated them on Phoenix's progress. Her improving health, her developmental milestones, the ongoing medical follow-ups to monitor the healing of her injuries. The burns are completely healed now, she reported. Dr. Rivera says there won't be any scarring. The bruising around her neck faded within the first week. Physically, she's recovering beautifully. And emotionally? Harold asked. Can you tell at this age? Lisa and Brian exchanged a glance loaded with the communication of a long-married couple. It's difficult to assess emotional trauma in infants, Brian acknowledged. But there are signs we look for: difficulty self-soothing, extreme startle responses, feeding issues. Phoenix showed some of those initially, but she's improving steadily. She's more secure now, Lisa added. Less fussy, better at settling herself. And she's starting to show normal attachment behaviors with us, which is crucial for her development. From the living room came the sound of Theo's voice, calm and steady as he read about constellation myths. James listened for a moment, pride swelling in his chest at the care his son was taking with each word, explaining concepts at Phoenix's level as if she could understand every syllable. What happens next? He asked, turning back to the Williamsons. Long term, Another loaded glance passed between the foster parents. That's somewhat uncertain, Brian admitted. The court will determine if parental rights should be terminated, given the circumstances. And if they are? Harold prompted. Then Phoenix would become eligible for adoption, Lisa explained. As her foster parents, we would have the option to apply. Would you? James asked directly. Lisa smiled softly. We've discussed it. We've fostered 17 infants over the years, and most have been reunified with family or adopted by others. But Phoenix. She trailed off, looking toward the living room where Theo continued reading. She feels different. We're trying not to get ahead of ourselves, Brian cautioned. The legal process can take months, sometimes years. And Lily Winters, despite everything, is still Phoenix's biological mother. She has certain rights that must be respected. Has she shown any interest in regaining custody? Harold asked. Brian shook his head. Quite the opposite. According to the social worker, Lily has expressed that she doesn't believe she's capable of being a mother, especially given her own trauma and the circumstances of Phoenix's birth. She's indicated she would support an adoption plan. The adults fell silent, contemplating the complex web of legal, ethical, and emotional considerations surrounding Phoenix's future. James found himself thinking of the countless displaced children he'd treated in conflict zones. How the most resilient ones were those who, despite everything, found stability and love in the aftermath of trauma. Whatever happens, Lisa said, breaking the silence, we want Theo to remain part of Phoenix's life. His connection to her is special, something that should be honored and preserved. James nodded gratitude. That means a lot. To all of us. He glanced at his watch. We should probably wrap up soon. I promised Theo we'd stop for lunch on the way home. They moved to the living room, where Theo was now showing Phoenix pictures from the astronomy book, pointing out particularly interesting images of nebulae and galaxies. This one's called the Eagle Nebula, he was explaining seriously. It's where new stars are being born. See how it looks like wings? Phoenix gurgled in response, one tiny hand reaching toward the colorful image. Theo gently guided her fingers to touch the page, his expression one of absolute delight at her engagement. Time to go, buddy, James said softly, hating to interrupt the moment but aware of the Williamson schedule. Theo looked up, disappointment flashing across his face before he nodded acceptance. Okay. He looked down at Phoenix. I have to go now, but I'll come back next Sunday. We can finish the chapter about black holes then. With clear reluctance, he passed Phoenix back to Lisa, who smiled understandingly. She'll be looking forward to it. As they prepared to leave, Brian pulled James aside briefly. There's something you should know, he said in a low voice. We've been instructed to be extra cautious regarding Phoenix's security. Detective Powell mentioned concerns about possible associates of Victor Reeves who might pose a risk. James tensed. I understood Reeves was in custody. He is, Brian confirmed. But apparently he has connections, people who might feel motivated to eliminate evidence, as Detective Powell put it. Has there been a specific threat? James asked, his military training surfacing in the precision of his question. Nothing concrete, just a general advisory to be vigilant. We have a security system, and the police have increased patrols in our neighborhood. Brian glanced toward Theo, who was saying a final goodbye to Phoenix. I wanted you to be aware, given Theo's involvement. James nodded grimly. I appreciate the heads up. We'll be careful. The drive home was filled with Theo's enthusiastic observations about Phoenix's development. How she seemed more alert, how she had reached for the book, how she had definitely smiled at him. She's doing great with the Williamsons, he concluded. They're really nice. They seem like excellent foster parents, James agreed, exchanging a glance with Harold in the passenger seat. And they clearly value your relationship with Phoenix. Theo beamed at this assessment. Lisa says I'm Phoenix's special friend. That even though she's little, she knows my voice means safety. That evening, after their promised lunch and an afternoon spent playing board games, James sat on the edge of Theo's bed for their first proper bedtime conversation in 2 years. I've missed this, James admitted, smoothing Theo's blanket. Tucking you in at night. Me too, Theo said, fighting a yawn. Will you be here the whole 2 weeks? Every single day, James promised. I don't have to report back until the 18th. Theo nodded, satisfaction evident in his sleepy expression. Good. Then you can come with me to see Phoenix again next Sunday. I'd like that. James hesitated, considering Brian Williamson's warning earlier that day. Theo, I want to talk to you about something important, about being careful. Theo's expression grew more alert. Because of Reeves's friends? Brian told you about that, didn't he? James blinked in surprise. How did you know about that? I heard Detective Powell talking to Grandpa about it a while ago, Theo admitted. I know we're supposed to be extra careful, to watch for strangers. James sighed, reminded again that his son missed very little. Yes, that's right. It's probably nothing to worry about, just a precaution. But I want you to promise me you'll be vigilant. No going places alone. No talking to people you don't know. I promise, Theo said solemnly. I'm being careful. For Phoenix's sake too. James studied his son's serious face. You really care about her, don't you? Theo nodded. I know it's weird. She's just a baby, and I only met her because of something awful. But I feel responsible for her. Like I need to make sure she's okay. That's not weird at all, James assured him. It's actually quite beautiful. When we help someone, truly help them in a meaningful way, it creates a bond. That's what you're feeling. Like how you feel about the soldiers you help? Theo asked perceptively. James smiled. Exactly like that. It's why I find it hard to leave them, even though I miss you terribly when I'm gone. This comparison seemed to satisfy Theo, who nodded understanding. I'm glad you're home now, Dad. Me too, buddy. Me too. James leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. Sleep well. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything. As he turned out the light and pulled the door almost closed, leaving it open just a crack, the way Theo preferred, James felt the weight of responsibility settle over him anew. His son had stepped into a situation larger and more dangerous than any child should face. Now it was his job as a father to ensure that Theo remained safe while processing what had happened. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. James accompanied Theo to school in the mornings, getting to know his teachers and classmates. They spent afternoons together, making up for lost time with bike rides, despite the winter chill, museum visits, and long conversations. Evenings were family time, the three foster men sharing meals and stories around the kitchen table. On Wednesday afternoon, as James waited outside Theo's school for dismissal, he noticed a car parked across the street, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. Something about it triggered his military instincts, a prickle of awareness at the back of his neck. The car had been there when he arrived 15 minutes earlier, engine running but no driver visible through the windshield. James casually shifted position to get a better view without being obvious about his interest. As he did, the school doors opened and children began streaming out. His attention momentarily diverted to scanning for Theo. He almost missed the sedan pulling away from the curb, driving slowly past the school entrance. Theo emerged with a group of classmates, spotting James and waving cheerfully. As he jogged over, James found himself scanning the area more carefully, a habit formed during his deployment now resurfacing in response to that prickle of unease. "Hey, Dad," Theo greeted him. "We learned about the solar system today. I already knew most of it from my books, but the teacher had this cool model where the planets actually orbit around the sun." "That sounds great, buddy," James replied, taking Theo's backpack and guiding him toward their car. He glanced back over his shoulder, but the sedan was gone. "Probably nothing," he told himself. "Just a parent waiting like you." But the incident stayed with him, a small knot of concern that he couldn't quite dismiss. That evening, after Theo was in bed, he mentioned it to Harold. "Probably nothing," his father agreed. "But it doesn't hurt to be cautious. Detective Powell did warn us to be vigilant." "I think I'll give her a call tomorrow," James decided, "just to check if there have been any developments we should know about." The call to Detective Powell the next morning was both reassuring and concerning. No specific threats had been identified, but the investigation had uncovered communications between Reeves and several associates prior to his arrest. Communications that indicated he was extremely concerned about the DNA evidence Phoenix could provide against him. "We have no reason to believe anyone would target Theo directly," Detective Powell emphasized. "But continued caution is warranted. If you notice anything unusual, vehicles lingering near your home, strangers showing undue interest in your family, please call me immediately." James thanked her and hung up, more unsettled than before the call. He found himself checking windows more frequently, scanning the street whenever they left the house, mentally cataloging potential threats with the hypervigilance he'd developed in combat zones. Friday afternoon, James took Theo to the library, a long-promised outing to find new books about astronomy and mythology. As they browsed the children's section, James maintained his new habit of regular environmental scans, noting exits and monitoring other patrons. A man entered the library, middle-aged, wearing a plain dark jacket and work boots. Something about his purposeful movement caught James's attention. The man glanced around the library, his gaze landing on the children's section where Theo was examining a large illustrated book on Greek mythology. "Theo," James said quietly, "let's check out those books now." Theo looked up, surprised by the abrupt suggestion. "But I haven't finished looking." "We can come back another day," James insisted, his tone brooking no argument. "Let's go now." Something in his father's demeanor must have communicated the seriousness of the situation, because Theo nodded without further protest, gathering his selected books and following James to the checkout desk. As they waited for the librarian to scan their books, James noticed the man moving toward the children's section they had just vacated. He was trying to appear casual, but his eyes kept drifting toward James and Theo. James placed himself between the man and his son, his body language subtly shifting to a more protective stance. The librarian, oblivious to the tension, chatted cheerfully with Theo about his book selections. "All set," she announced, handing the stack of books to Theo. "Enjoy your reading, young man." "Thank you," Theo replied politely, tucking the books into his backpack. James guided Theo toward the exit, keeping himself between his son and the stranger, who was now openly watching them. As they reached the door, James risked a direct look at the man, meeting his gaze with a clear message. "I see you." The man held his stare for a moment before abruptly turning away, disappearing into the stacks. In the car, Theo buckled his seatbelt and looked at his father curiously. "Was something wrong in there? You got all stiff, like you do on the video calls when there's an alarm at your base." James considered how to respond, balancing honesty with the desire not to frighten his son. "I noticed someone who seemed to be watching us," he admitted. "It was probably nothing, but I decided it was better to leave." Theo nodded, accepting this explanation. "Because of Reeves's friends?" "Just a precaution," James assured him, starting the car and checking all mirrors before pulling away from the curb. Better safe than sorry. That night, James had trouble sleeping. The incident at the library, minor as it was, had triggered his combat-honed instincts. The man hadn't done anything explicitly threatening, had, in fact, backed off when challenged with direct eye contact. But something about the encounter felt wrong. Around midnight, James got up and checked all the doors and windows of the house, ensuring everything was secure. He paused at Theo's bedroom door, pushing it open slightly to check on his sleeping son. Theo was peaceful, one arm around his blue blanket, his face relaxed in slumber. The sight calmed James somewhat. He was probably overreacting, seeing threats where none existed, a common side effect of prolonged deployment in high-stress environments. Still, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that Theo's involvement in Phoenix's rescue had created a vulnerability, one that needed to be taken seriously. Saturday passed without incident, a quiet day at home with board games and movies. By Sunday morning, James had almost convinced himself that his concerns were exaggerated, that the man in the library had been nothing more than a random patron whose casual glance he'd misinterpreted. "Ready to see Phoenix?" he asked Theo over breakfast. Theo nodded enthusiastically, his mouth full of cereal. He swallowed before speaking, a rule his mother had strictly enforced. "I finished the astronomy book, so I'm bringing my dinosaur encyclopedia today. Lisa says it's good to expose babies to different topics." Harold, reading the newspaper at the end of the table, smiled at this. "You're becoming quite the early childhood education expert, Theo." "I just want her brain to develop right," Theo explained seriously. "Dr. Rivera says the first year is really important for neural connections." James chuckled. "I see you've been interrogating Phoenix's medical team." "Not interrogating," Theo corrected. "Just asking questions. Dr. Rivera doesn't mind. She says I ask better questions than most adults." After breakfast, they prepared for the visit to the Williamsons. Harold opted to stay home, citing a desire to work on his vegetable garden plans for the spring. So James and Theo set off alone in the car. The drive to South Portland was pleasant, with Theo pointing out landmarks along the way and James marveling at his son's detailed knowledge of the area. As they turned onto the Williamson Street, however, James noticed a vehicle parked about half a block from the house. The same nondescript sedan he'd spotted outside Theo's school days earlier. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he kept his voice casual. "Looks like the Williamsons have visitors," he commented, nodding toward a minivan in their driveway. "That's Ms. Patel's car." Theo identified it immediately. "The social worker. She comes to check on Phoenix every week." James nodded, filing away this information while keeping the sedan in his peripheral vision as they pulled into the Williamsons' driveway. "Let me go first," he said as they exited the car, positioning himself between Theo and the street. Lisa answered the door with Phoenix in her arms, the baby dressed in a pale green outfit with tiny embroidered flowers. Come in," she welcomed them. "Phoenix has been particularly alert today. I think she knows it's your visiting day, Theo." As they stepped inside, James glanced back at the street, but the sedan was no longer visible from this angle. He made a mental note to check again before they left. Miss Patel was in the living room, a folder of paperwork open on the coffee table. She stood to greet them, her professional demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "Major Foster, Theo. Good to see you both," she said. "I'm just finishing up my weekly check-in. Perfect timing, actually, as I have some news that might interest you." They settled in the living room, Theo immediately reaching for Phoenix, whom Lisa transferred to his careful embrace. James watched with pride as his son adjusted the baby's position with natural ease, supporting her head and speaking to her in soft, clear tones. "What news?" he asked Miss Patel, dividing his attention between the social worker and the window that overlooked the street. "The court has scheduled a hearing regarding the termination of parental rights," Miss Patel explained, keeping her voice low enough that Theo, absorbed in showing Phoenix pictures from his dinosaur book, wouldn't overhear. "Lily Winters has signed voluntary relinquishment papers, waiving her parental rights. And given that Victor Reeves is facing multiple felony charges and has made no claim to paternity, the judge is likely to approve the termination." "What does that mean for Phoenix?" James asked, though he could guess the answer. "It means," Lisa interjected, her expression cautiously hopeful, "that Phoenix would be legally free for adoption. And you and Brian would apply?" James confirmed. Lisa nodded. "We've already begun the paperwork. Nothing is certain, of course. The court must determine that we're the best possible placement for Phoenix. But as her current foster parents with a strong record, we have a favorable position." "That's wonderful news," James said sincerely. "Theo will be thrilled to know Phoenix has a chance at a permanent home with you." Miss Patel gathered her papers, preparing to leave. "I should mention that Lily has made one request regarding Phoenix's future," she said. "She's asked that Theo remain part of Phoenix's life, if possible. She feels strongly that the connection between them is significant." James glanced at his son, still entirely focused on the baby in his arms. "I think that would be important for both of them." "We agree completely," Lisa assured him. "Regardless of the legal outcome, we want Theo to remain Phoenix's special friend." After Miss Patel left, Brian emerged from the kitchen with refreshments. The adults chatted while Theo continued reading to Phoenix, his voice animated as he described different dinosaur species and their characteristics. "Paleontologists, those are scientists who study fossils. Think T. Rex could bite with a force of 12,800 pounds. He was explaining seriously. "That's strong enough to crush a car. But don't worry, they're all extinct now." Phoenix gurgled in response, her tiny hand batting at the colorful illustration. Theo smiled delightedly at her engagement. "You like the T. Rex? Wait till you see the Triceratops. It had 3 horns and a big frill to protect its neck." James found himself dividing his attention between this heartwarming scene and periodic glances out the window, checking for the sedan he'd spotted earlier. It hadn't reappeared, but his unease remained. "Everything okay?" Brian asked quietly, noticing James's vigilance. "Probably," James replied in an equally low voice. "I noticed a car that seemed out of place when we arrived. Same one I saw outside Theo's school." Brian's expression grew serious. "I'll call Detective Powell after you leave. We've been extra cautious since she warned us." Their visit concluded without incident. As they prepared to leave, James scanned the street carefully before guiding Theo to their car. The suspicious sedan was nowhere in sight, but James remained vigilant during the entire drive home. That evening, Detective Powell called to inform them she was increasing patrols near both the Foster and Williamson homes. "Just a precaution," she assured James. "We've identified 2 of Reeves's associates who might pose a risk, but there's no direct evidence they're targeting anyone." As James hung up the phone, he found Theo watching him from the doorway. "Is Phoenix going to be okay?" he asked, his perceptiveness once again surprising his father. "Yes," James assured him, drawing his son into a hug. "Everyone's working to keep her safe. And you too." "Good," Theo said simply, "because she deserves to be safe after everything." James nodded, struck by his son's profound empathy and wisdom beyond his years. What had begun as a chance encounter behind a grocery store had transformed into something life-changing for everyone involved, especially for the tiny infant who had found not just rescue but a chance at a whole new future, and for the boy who had discovered his own courage in the simple act of stopping to listen when he heard a cry for help. "She'll be safe," James promised. "Thanks to you, she has that chance." 6 months had passed since that cold December evening when Theo discovered Phoenix in the dumpster behind Good Value Market. Winter had reluctantly yielded to spring, and spring had blossomed into summer. Portland had transformed from a snow-covered postcard into a vibrant coastal town, harbor waters sparkling under the July sun and sidewalks bustling with tourists. In those 6 months, much had changed for the Foster family. James had returned to his deployment after his 2-week leave, but true to his promise, he had submitted paperwork requesting a stateside assignment upon completion of his current tour. Harold had planted his vegetable garden, now flourishing with tomatoes, cucumbers, and an ambitious row of sweet corn. And Theo, turned 9 in April, had grown nearly an inch taller and immeasurably wiser. His weekly visits to Phoenix continued faithfully, his blue blanket tucked away except on the hardest nights, his understanding of the world's complexities deepening with each passing day. On this particular Sunday morning, Theo stood before his bedroom mirror, carefully combing his hair with unusual attention to detail. He wore his best clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt his grandfather had ironed the night before. "You look very handsome," Harold observed from the doorway. "The judge will be impressed." Theo turned, nervous energy evident in his restless hands. "Do you think it will go okay? What if something goes wrong?" Harold crossed the room and straightened Theo's already straight collar. "The termination of parental rights was granted 3 months ago. Detective Powell confirmed that Reeves will spend at least 20 years in prison. Lily has consistently maintained her support for the adoption. The Williamsons have been Phoenix's foster parents for half a year with an exemplary record." He smiled reassuringly. "And perhaps most importantly, Ms. Patel is firmly in their corner. I'd say the odds are overwhelmingly positive." Theo nodded, absorbing this logical assessment. "But court is unpredictable. I read about a case where a judge denied an adoption because he didn't like the parents' political views." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Have you been researching adoption law?" "A little," Theo admitted. "I wanted to understand the process better." Harold shook his head in fond exasperation. "Of course you did. Well, I can assure you that Judge Martinez has an excellent reputation for fairness and for prioritizing children's welfare. And this hearing is largely ceremonial. The legal groundwork has been thoroughly prepared." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. "That will be Dr. Rivera," Harold said. "She's driving us to the courthouse, remember?" Theo nodded, giving his hair one final adjustment before following his grandfather downstairs. Dr. Nora Rivera waited in the living room, looking different in civilian clothes rather than her hospital scrubs. Her dark hair was neatly styled, and she wore a simple but elegant dress appropriate for a court appearance. "There's the man of the hour," she greeted Theo with a warm smile. "Ready for the big day?" "I think so," Theo replied, his voice more subdued than usual. "Thanks for driving us." "My pleasure," Dr. Rivera assured him. "I wouldn't miss this for anything. Phoenix was one of my most memorable patients, and watching her journey has been incredible." The drive to the Cumberland County Courthouse was filled with Dr. Rivera's cheerful conversation, clearly intended to distract Theo from his nerves. She updated them on hospital gossip, shared stories about her new puppy, and skillfully avoided the weighty topic that occupied all their thoughts. The courthouse, an imposing brick building with white columns, loomed ahead, its steps already crowded with people entering for various Monday morning hearings. As they found parking and walked toward the entrance, Theo's steps slowed. "What if Phoenix cries during the hearing?" he worried aloud. "Babies aren't supposed to be in courtrooms, are they? Family court is different," Dr. Rivera explained. "Judge Martinez actually prefers to see the children involved in adoption cases. And Phoenix is much more settled now. She doesn't cry often." Inside, They navigated the security checkpoint and found their way to the designated courtroom. The Williamsons were already there, Brian in a suit and Lisa in a floral dress. Phoenix perched on her lap in a pale yellow outfit with a matching headband. The baby, now a robust 7-month-old with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, spotted Theo immediately and reached out her arms toward him, making the insistent sound that had become her particular greeting for him. "She wants you," Lisa said with a smile, passing Phoenix to Theo as they sat in the row behind the Williamsons. Phoenix grabbed at Theo's carefully combed hair, babbling happily. "Hi, Phoenix," he said, his anxiety momentarily forgotten in the joy of her recognition. "You look pretty today." Miss Patel approached, elegant in a navy pantsuit, her briefcase tucked under one arm. "Everyone's here, excellent," she said, surveying the assembled group. "We'll be called soon. The judge has reviewed all the documentation thoroughly, and I don't anticipate any issues." Theo nodded, bouncing Phoenix gently on his knee, her solid weight and sweet baby smell a comfort against the formality of their surroundings. "How long will it take?" "Adoption finalizations are usually brief," Miss Patel explained. "Perhaps 20 minutes at most. The judge will review the case summary, ask the Williamsons a few questions, and then make his ruling. Assuming all goes as expected, you'll be attending a celebration afterward rather than a consolation." Phoenix rested her head against Theo's chest, her eyelids growing heavy despite the unfamiliar surroundings. He marveled at her trust, at the way she could relax in his arms even in this strange, echoing courthouse with its hard benches and hushed voices. "Williamson adoption," a court officer called from the doorway. "Judge Martinez's chambers." Miss Patel looked surprised. "In chambers? That's unusual, but actually a good sign. The judge likely wants a more intimate setting." They followed the court officer down a hallway to a large office where Judge Martinez, a gray-haired man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, waited behind an imposing desk. Unlike the formal courtroom they'd expected, the chambers felt almost welcoming, with bookshelves lining the walls and photographs of smiling children placed strategically among legal texts. "Good morning," the judge greeted them, gesturing to a grouping of chairs arranged before his desk. "I prefer to handle adoption finalizations in a more personal setting, especially when young children are involved." As they settled into the chairs, the Williamsons in front, Theo still holding Phoenix, with Harold and Dr. Rivera flanking him. Judge Martinez folded his hands on his desk and surveyed the group. "I've reviewed all the documentation in this case thoroughly," he began. "It's one of the more remarkable situations I've encountered in my 20 years on the bench." His gaze settled on Theo. "And you must be Theodore Foster." Theo straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. I understand you're the young man who found this child and saved her life," the judge continued, his tone respectful rather than condescending. "I just heard her crying," Theo replied softly, his standard deflection of praise. "Anyone would have looked." "But not everyone did look," Judge Martinez observed. "You did, and your actions set in motion everything that brings us here today." He turned his attention to the Williamsons. "Mr. and Mrs. Williamson, the home study reports and Ms. Patel's recommendations are exemplary. You've provided exceptional care during a difficult transition period, and your commitment to maintaining connections important to Phoenix speaks highly of your understanding of her needs." Brian and Lisa nodded, their postures tense with anticipation. "There is, however, one matter we need to address," the judge continued, causing everyone to stiffen slightly. "The child's legal name. The paperwork indicates you wish to name her Phoenix Theodora Williamson. Is that correct?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We wanted to honor both her journey and the person who made it possible." Theo felt a flush of surprise and emotion. The Williamsons had mentioned considering keeping Phoenix as her name, but he hadn't known about the middle name, a feminized version of his own. Judge Martinez smiled. "I find that entirely appropriate." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "Now, normally I would ask a series of formal questions, but given the thorough preparation in this case and the clear recommendation from all involved professionals, I'm prepared to rule immediately." He reached for a wooden gavel resting on a small stand. By the power vested in me by the state of Maine, I hereby declare that the child formerly known as Baby Doe is legally adopted by Brian and Lisa Williamson, with all the rights and responsibilities thereof. From this day forward, she shall be known as Phoenix Theodora Williamson, entitled to all the privileges of a natural-born child of the Williamsons. The gentle tap of the gavel punctuated this pronouncement. Congratulations, the judge added warmly. This adoption is finalized. Lisa burst into tears while Brian placed an arm around her shoulders, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Ms. Patel beamed, and Dr. Rivera discreetly wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Theo sat very still, Phoenix now sleeping peacefully against his chest, trying to process what had just happened. It was over. The legal limbo. The uncertainty about Phoenix's future. She officially belonged to the Williamsons now. She had a permanent home, a legal name, a secure future. Theo? Harold touched his grandson's shoulder gently. Are you all right? Theo nodded, unable to articulate the complex mix of emotions swirling inside him. Joy for Phoenix, relief that she was safe, pride that his name would always be part of hers, and a bittersweet pang of loss, though he couldn't quite identify what he was losing. Would you like a photo to commemorate the occasion? Judge Martinez offered, surprising them with this departure from judicial formality. My clerk is quite handy with a camera. They arranged themselves before the judge's desk, the Williamsons in the center with Phoenix now transferred to Lisa's arms, Theo standing beside them with Harold's hand on his shoulder, Dr. Rivera and Ms. Patel flanking the group. The clerk captured several shots, the judge's camera flashing in the wood-paneled chamber. I'll have copies sent to all of you, Judge Martinez promised. This is a special case that deserves documentation. As they filed out of the chambers, Ms. Patel reminded everyone about the celebration planned at the Williamsons' home. Just a small gathering, she assured them. Close friends and the professionals who've been involved in Phoenix's journey. In the courthouse corridor, Lisa approached Theo, Phoenix now awake and reaching for him again. Would you like to hold her on the way to the car? Theo nodded, accepting the transfer with practiced ease. As they walked through the courthouse and down the front steps, Phoenix babbled happily, seemingly aware of the significance of the day. Theo, Lisa said as they reached the parking lot, Brian and I want you to know something important. Phoenix is legally our daughter now, but you will always be her hero, the person who gave her a chance at life. We've decided that once she's old enough to understand, we'll tell her the full story of how she came to us. Even the hard parts? Theo asked, thinking of Lily and Reeves and the violent beginning to Phoenix's life. Lisa nodded solemnly. Even those, in age-appropriate ways, of course. But we believe honesty is crucial, and her story, though it begins in darkness, is ultimately one of hope and courage. Your courage. And we want you to remain part of her life, Brian added. Not just during these early years, but as she grows up. If that's something you would want. I would, Theo confirmed immediately. Very much. The drive to the Williamsons' home was a blur of emotion for Theo. He sat beside Phoenix's car seat in the back of Harold's car, watching as she played with a small stuffed elephant, occasionally catching his eye and offering a toothless smile that squeezed his heart. The Williamsons' house was decorated festively for the occasion. A banner reading, "Welcome Forever, Phoenix," hung across the front porch, and balloons in yellow and white bobbed gently in the summer breeze. Inside, a small gathering had already assembled. Detective Powell in civilian clothes, Nurse Abernathy from the NICU, and several friends of the Williamsons. On a side table, professionally framed photographs documented Phoenix's journey, her first day in the NICU, her homecoming with the Williamsons, and several shots of her developmental milestones. Amid these was a carefully preserved newspaper clipping with the headline "Local Boy Finds Abandoned Newborn, Saves Life," accompanied by a school photo of Theo that the reporter had obtained from his principal. The celebration was low-key but joyful, with catered sandwiches and a cake decorated with a stylized phoenix rising from flames. The words, "A New Beginning," piped in elegant script beneath it. Adults circulated with glasses of champagne or sparkling cider, offering toasts to the new family and to Theo. To Phoenix, Detective Powell raised her glass, who showed us all what resilience truly means, and to Theo, who heard a cry no one else noticed. Theo accepted these accolades with quiet dignity, though his characteristic modesty remained. When it came time to cut the cake, Lisa insisted that he join them in the ceremonial first slice, positioning him beside them in yet another photo opportunity. "Where's Phoenix going to sleep tonight?" Theo asked as the celebration began winding down. "In the same room?" "Yes," Brian confirmed. "Though we've been discussing converting the guest room into her big girl room when she's ready for a proper bed. We thought perhaps you might help us design it, since you know her preferences so well." Theo brightened at this invitation. "She likes yellow. And animals, especially elephants and giraffes." "Perfect starting points," Lisa agreed. "We'll go shopping together when the time comes." As guests began departing, Detective Powell approached Theo with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "A little something to mark the occasion," she explained. "Not just the adoption, but the 6-month anniversary of your brave action." Theo accepted the gift with surprise. "Thank you. Should I open it now?" "If you'd like." Detective Powell nodded. Inside the package was a polished silver medallion on a simple chain. One side showed the scales of justice, the other bore an inscription: "For exceptional courage in service to another. Theodore Foster, December 9th, 2024. "It's the Civilian Commendation Medal from the Portland Police Department," Detective Powell explained. "We don't award these often, only for truly extraordinary acts of civilian bravery." The chief of police and the mayor approved it unanimously. Theo stared at the medallion, tracing the engraved letters with his fingertip. "Thank you," he managed, his voice husky with emotion. "You earned it," Detective Powell said simply. "More than most adults who receive it, in fact." As the gathering dispersed, Theo found himself in the Williamsons' nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Phoenix on his lap. The room was peaceful, decorated in soft yellows and greens, stuffed animals arranged on shelves and a mobile of stars and moons hanging above the crib. "You're officially Phoenix Theodora Williamson now," he told the baby softly. "That's a big name for such a little person, but you'll grow into it." Phoenix yawned, her eyelids drooping as the excitement of the day caught up with her. Theo rocked gently, continuing his one-sided conversation. "The Williamsons are your parents now. They're really nice and they'll take good care of you. And I'll still come visit every week." As Phoenix drifted toward sleep, Theo found himself reflecting on the past 6 months. How a single decision to investigate a strange sound had altered not just one life, but many. Phoenix had a family. Lily was receiving the therapy and education she desperately needed. Reeves was facing justice for his crimes. And Theo himself had changed, growing in ways that went beyond physical height. He understood more about the world now, about its darkness, yes, but also about its capacity for healing and hope. "She's beautiful when she sleeps," Lisa observed from the doorway. "So peaceful." Theo nodded, carefully transferring the now sleeping Phoenix to her waiting arms. "She doesn't have nightmares anymore. Nurse Abernathy said she used to startle and cry in her sleep at the hospital." "She rarely does now," Lisa confirmed, gently placing Phoenix in her crib. "Dr. Rivera says that's a good sign, that she feels secure enough to relax completely." They stood watching the sleeping child for a moment before Lisa spoke again. "Theo, there's something Brian and I have been meaning to ask you." "What is it?" "We'd like you to be Phoenix's godfather," she said. "It's a symbolic role in many ways, but an important one. A godparent is someone who makes a special commitment to a child, who promises to be there throughout their life, to offer guidance and support." Theo looked up in surprise. "But I'm only 9. Don't godparents have to be adults?" Lisa smiled. "There's no legal age requirement, and you've already shown more maturity and commitment to Phoenix than many adults ever would. You'd grow into the role as she grows up." "I'd like that," Theo said after a moment's consideration. "I'd like that very much." "Wonderful." Lisa squeezed his shoulder gently. "We'll make it official at her blessing ceremony next month." When Harold came to collect Theo for the drive home, He found his grandson helping Brian assemble a new toy for Phoenix, a colorful play gym that would allow her to reach for hanging objects as she developed her motor skills. "Ready to go, buddy?" Harold asked. "It's getting late." Theo nodded, carefully placing the last piece of the play gym into position. "All done," he told Brian. "Phoenix can use it tomorrow." "Thanks for your help," Brian said, standing and stretching. "Engineering doesn't come naturally to me." In the car, Theo was unusually quiet, processing the events of the day. Harold gave him space, understanding that his grandson was working through complex emotions. "The Williamsons asked me to be Phoenix's godfather," Theo finally said as they turned onto their street. Harold glanced sideways, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "That's a significant honor. Do you think I can do it?" Theo asked. "Be a good godfather, I mean?" "I have absolute confidence in you," Harold assured him. "You've already shown extraordinary commitment to Phoenix's well-being. Being a godfather is an extension of what you're already doing, being a steady, positive presence in her life." Theo nodded, reassured by his grandfather's faith in him. "It feels right somehow, like I'm supposed to keep watching out for her." "Some connections transcend ordinary explanation," Harold observed. "You and Phoenix have one of those connections. I believe it will benefit both of you throughout your lives." At home, Theo carefully placed Detective Powell's medallion on his dresser beside the framed photograph taken the day Phoenix left the hospital. In the image, he sat in the NICU rocking chair holding the infant, his expression a mixture of pride and wistfulness. He changed into pajamas and brushed his teeth, the routine of bedtime comforting after such an emotionally charged day. As he climbed into bed, he noticed his blue blanket, the one he'd kept since babyhood, folded neatly on his shelf. He hadn't needed it for weeks now. Harold appeared in the doorway for their nightly check-in. "Quite a day," he observed, sitting on the edge of Theo's bed. "Yeah," Theo agreed, "but a good one. Phoenix is officially a Williamson now. And you're officially her godfather," Harold added with a smile. "Your parents would be so proud of you, Theo. Your mother especially. She had such a generous heart, just like yours." Theo absorbed this comparison, finding comfort in the connection to the mother he still missed every day. "Do you think Dad will be able to meet Phoenix when he comes home?" "I'm sure the Williamsons would welcome him," Harold assured him. "They understand how important your whole family is to Phoenix's story." As Harold said goodnight and turned out the light, Theo found himself thinking about family, how it could be created in unexpected ways, how bonds could form between people with no biological connection. Phoenix would grow up with the Williamsons as her parents, but she would also have Theo as her godfather, Harold as a kind of honorary great-grandfather, and eventually James as another caring adult in her life. It wasn't conventional, this patchwork family they had created, but it was real and solid and filled with love. And for Phoenix, who had entered the world in such darkness and cold, that made all the difference. "Good night, Phoenix," Theo whispered into the darkness of his room, a habit he'd formed over the past months. "Sleep tight in your forever home." 3 weeks later, in the Williamsons' backyard, a small gathering assembled for Phoenix's blessing ceremony. An arbor had been erected on the lawn, decorated with yellow roses and white ribbons. Beneath it, a minister stood ready to officiate the brief, non-denominational service. Theo, dressed in a new suit that his father had sent from overseas, stood with the Williamsons beneath the arbor. Phoenix, alert and curious in a white dress with yellow sash, surveyed the assembled guests from Lisa's arms, occasionally reaching toward Theo with recognition. "Friends and family," the minister began, "we gather today to celebrate Phoenix Theodora Williamson and to ask for blessings upon her life. Phoenix's story began in difficulty, but through the courage of a child and the dedication of many caring adults, she has found her way to a loving home and a promising future." Theo listened as the minister spoke about the meaning of Phoenix's name, the mythical bird that rises from ashes to begin anew, and about the responsibilities of parents and community in nurturing a child's growth. "And now," the minister continued, "Brian and Lisa have asked Theodore Foster to serve as Phoenix's godfather. a special guardian who promises to support her throughout her life's journey. Theo, do you accept this responsibility? Theo stepped forward, his voice clear and steady despite his nerves. I do. Will you promise to be present in Phoenix's life, to offer guidance and support, to celebrate her joys and comfort her sorrows, to help her understand her unique story with honesty and compassion? I promise, Theo affirmed. The minister smiled. Then let us formally recognize this commitment. He motioned for Theo to step closer, and Lisa gently transferred Phoenix into his arms. The baby immediately reached for Theo's face, her tiny fingers patting his cheek in what felt like recognition and approval. A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the assembled guests. By the authority of love and commitment, I pronounce Theodore Foster the godfather of Phoenix Theodora Williamson, the minister declared. May their bond bring blessings to them both throughout their lives. As Theo stood holding Phoenix beneath the flower-draped arbor, sunlight dappling through leaves to create patterns on the grass around them, he felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the pieces of a puzzle had finally aligned. Phoenix cooed softly, her bright eyes fixed on his face, her tiny hand clutching his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Theo made a silent promise that went beyond the formal words of the ceremony. A promise to always be the person who heard her cry when no one else was listening, who would carry her through darkness toward safety, who would remind her always that even the coldest beginning could lead to the warmest life. I've got you, he whispered, so quietly that only Phoenix could hear. Always. And Phoenix, as if understanding the depth of this commitment, offered him a gummy smile that contained all the promise of her name: renewal, rebirth, and the triumph of hope over despair. In the gentle Maine summer, surrounded by people who had become an unconventional but unshakable family, Theo Foster held the future in his arms and knew with absolute certainty that both he and Phoenix had found exactly where they belonged.